Zionism is racism. Israel cannot be both. Israel is either a racist Jewish state or it's a democratic state for everybody. And that's what I would like Israel to be. I'd like a democratic solution, one state with equal rights for all its inhabitants. Your organization, Human Rights Watch, issued a report last year about Israel, and the conclusion was it is an apartheid state. And there are four major human rights groups in the last 2 years who issued similar reports, reached the same conclusion. Israel is an apartheid state. So apartheid is racism. Apartheid is discrimination. But Israel is the only member of the United Nations that I know which is officially racist. And I say this because of the July 2018 nation-state law, which says the Jews have a unique right to self-determination in Israel. Unique means exclusive.
Yes.
It means Arabs have no right to self-determination. It means even if Arabs became a majority, they would still have no right to self-determination. So most certainly Zionism is a racist ideology, and it is largely responsible for the Nakba that has unfolded throughout the last century and continues today.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Saturday, March 29th, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. Definitely an interesting development in regard to the RFK Jr. blackmail conversation that seems to be overtaking the internet today. Definitely something, there's just about a endless amount of directions that we could take this conversation. One of the obvious points is how about we discuss the many people that were conversing about this before and being pushed back on before the selection process. But let's also go into this today and discuss the evidence that's there or lack thereof around this conversation. Make sure we're fleshing out what's really going on around it. It's very interesting, but I think it's important. Even if it turns out, we'll get into it today. It's an important conversation because to me, just to give you one personal note before we dive into it, after I go over some things to start, is it's interesting that right now, what we all know, there's a lot being debated, a lot disputed, people pushing back on certain ideological, political sides and around Israel in particular. But what everyone's aware there's an ongoing war. Clearly, it's a genocide. The amount of people, the amount of evidence, everything around this conversation is. It's infuriating, which jumps to my mind, but it's I'm trying to think of a word that's not juvenile. It's just ridiculous that we're having to debate something that is so tangibly everything about it, every metric, every group. And we've been over this so many times. I don't even want to go into it again. It's obviously a genocide by every single metric and every group that has standing. But what's frustrating about it is that we have to still debate that. My point, though, is that that's one of the most obvious parts of this. People dispute genocide, war crime. Let's call it war crimes. I don't think anyone in the conversation is disputing war crimes other than blind Zionist supporters. What's interesting to me is that because that's such an obvious conversation, then what has come from that is a conversation that I never would have expected to see is the obvious open, being debated, but open at the center of the conversation of whether Israel is influencing, controlling U.S. policy, which is still desperately flailing, trying to be called racist, even though we're talking about a government and influencing policy. Anybody honest is going, I guess it's possibly rooted in some kind of racism, or do you have evidence of that claim? It's gotten so cartoonish. Now to the point is I think it's interesting as this starts to spin out around people that are, in a way trying to make sense of why that's what we're seeing without really identifying or highlighting that that's why we're having this conversation. maybe it is a deflection. Maybe it's meant to say, look over here, but is it really over here? It's right in the center of the conversation. So it's like, look at this, but not the whole thing, just this one tiny part of it. Anyway, we'll go into all of it and how important it is regardless of where you lay the facts in this conversation. But I think it's interesting to see sort of this implosion of the conversation, which we keep seeing within the conservative right side of the conversation, which I think speaks a lot to a lot around this. But we're going to get into some information around USAID, again, that I think is just kind of relevant to the ongoing manipulations. I want to make sure we talk about some health-related overlaps, one about the EPA, but a few different points that I think are relevant around MAHA that then kind of overlaps with the RFK Jr. conversation. But bigger today, the main thing I want to kind of, the main thrust is to talk about Zionism again and how it relates to the different points we're seeing today, politically, foreign policy, but in kind of like the realm of the RFK Jr. U.S. political field overlap of the conversation. And, many other things we're going to get into as it relates to that. I'm going to give you some updates on what's going on the ground in Gaza and a couple of different examples therein. But I think it's important that we highlight this from an American perspective. And, my opinion on this, guys. Frankly, I think it's insane that we even have to argue that it's not clear, that instead of the conversation being to what degree is Israel influencing, if not controlling U.S. policy, that we have to even have that conversation. It's just strange. This is not, the evidence is there, guys. The amount of funding, the amount of obvious infiltration that they'll proudly support. I mean, it's an insane conversation. I think that in and of itself shows you how much the control exists. But that's a fallacy in regard to, that should not be the one thing you point to go, that proves it, right? That is a kind of a fallacy in and of itself to point to something like that to prove the point, but it still is evidence. You can clearly see that is happening. It's obvious to what degree. Yeah, I mean, Zionists being in Trump's cabinet, for example. I mean, it's or the amount of overwhelming kind of like personal from, they believe deeply in the biblical right, for example, of Israel to take what they want. It is impossible to miss. And I think that's why this conversation is coming out. But I want to start with a quick point that I put out before I went live, just in case you guys missed it, in regard to a little DDoS attack that TLAV suffered today, and our background team kind of, did their job. But it's just interesting to see how much of this continues to happen. And I just think it's worth pointing out. But the only reason to bring it up, because it was a brief thing, which in case you guys were curious and hadn't seen me follow up, I did post below. Oh, this is somebody else. I posted below just simply saying that they appeared to have dealt with it. We're back on track. But this is somebody just adding to this, saying one time he tried to DM me, that the one time he tried to DM me about something in regard to that, this is what happens. And I don't know how, I see this so often. People simply try to send me a direct message and their account get locked for 24 hours. How is that not basically training people to avoid sending me content, which seems to be an ongoing example, but just a side point to get started. But I want to start with USAID right out of the gate. Oh, did I? For the podcast, amazingly, even though I read this 4 times over, apparently it says USIAD, but interesting how that works out. But it says this is a post that came out today. Weirdly enough, I agree actually, with no real comment on how obviously this door with the lock seems to look like a male figure, which is kind of funny to me. That's such an obvious thing in the conversation. Everyone's commenting on the chat, but Alex Jones comes out and says, Trump strikes again. State Department says it's officially shutting down USAID. Now, I think it's important just from a broader sense of this, before we get into what really is going on, just to highlight whether him or whoever else is out there making this conversation. What do you mean say strikes again? What does that mean? Has it ever been shut down? No, up to this very point. They all said that. This is why it's again in my title today, and it didn't. It very rapidly became, it's all done, shut down, and and then it became, oh, well, now Rubio's taking it this, and we're going to be redirecting the funds this way, and so not getting shuttered, okay. But still being diminished, okay, fine, you could have said that first, but it was shut down first. They all reported it that way, and then it turned out that it was really kind of being redirected, and some things were stopped. That's clear. But nobody seems to fully be able to verify to what degree. So all the people screaming about how they stopped 80% of X, Y, and Z. Oh, did they? Did they send you the documents? Did you verify that? The reality is pretty clearly a lot of what they said was shut down was simply redirected elsewhere. I have personally shown some examples of this. I would never claim to know what percentage of what has been officially stopped. Even then, as we'll get into, it's a fallacy, seeing as how if we're simply, as he tells you, as it really has always been, nudge, nudge, this is the reality of it under the State Department now. The point is that then becomes irrelevant, right? If all you're doing is pulling this entity into the State Department and claiming we stopped all of this, well, now the budget is basically the State Department budget. And so now we don't even get to know what becomes is State Department versus USAID, or it's all just big one thing, right? So let's just say they go 80% is now stopped. Well, what happens if they roll it under the State Department and they continue all those things, and how it's all up in the air is my point. We'll come back into that main point in regard to where the funding's actually going. But saying he strikes again is in and of itself kind of insulting, seeing as how nothing actually strikes again would mean he shut it down for a second time, and that's not what happened. But then it says State Department says it's officially shutting down USAID. Well, I'll read to you what they said. That's not what they said. And it's very frustrating that we have to constantly batter back these hyperbolic, fact-free claims from people in the mainstream alternative media. And so there goes the deep state favorite piggy bank. Yeah, well, that's not inaccurate. But if you're going to make it the deep state's piggy bank, then explain to me why Donald Trump's administration used it aggressively throughout his last administration, and they're still using it right now. Does that not matter? I just showed you 5 different contracts from the USA spending using USAID, some of which were climate change related, some of which were male circumcisions in, one was actually in Mozambique overlap, one was in South Africa, one was... Funny how that only matters when it's a buzzword point about something else. But that's all. That's not to make it left or right. They all do it. So if it's a deep state thing, then they're all deep state, right? But that's the kind of faulty logic you're getting, or the lack of it on one side of it from the corporate works exactly. Corporate mainstream alternative media. But I simply said wrong or dishonest yet again. It is just more shell game. And I'll show you exactly what I'm pulling this from. They are not shutting down USAID. They're simply repurposing it and moving it under the State Department. ... Somebody missed this in the conversation online today. So, in other words, admitting what it has always been. Obviously, that means that it was already under the State Department, which I clearly know, which we've already said many times. But it says, and effectively giving it a larger budget. Well, if you understand what I mean by that, if you're simply moving into the State Department, which again was really always what it was, okay? All they had was this supposed, quote, independent entity that was just run by the same thing, okay? But now, as you fold it into the State Department, the budgets are now one and the same. It just becomes officially, is the way to say that, part of the State Department. It was already, but it wasn't official. But now all you do is you lose the differentiation between the two. I'm sure they'll give you some kind of a breakdown for what they claim is going into the State Department version of whatever it becomes now. But we don't get to fully, it's like black budget stuff, guys. We won't really know. That's not to say that I know it's not, but I don't know it is. It's either way. But here's what it says in the actual breakdown. This is from Reuters. USAID told staff all jobs not required by law to be eliminated. Now, look, I'm not claiming in any sense that they are not at least feigning or in some ways actually diminishing what the front-facing part of the independent USAID is. But if we already know it's the State Department and always has been and is now being folded into it, whatever they do to this open-faced entity supposedly still independent is meaningless at this point, if you understand what I'm trying to highlight here. But just to be clear, there are things being moved, and yes, some things are being cut. Even with we made the point about DOGE's larger receipts, web page. It's clear that there are things that have been stopped. I don't think anyone is honestly claiming that literally nothing has been stopped. It's about the real picture. Seeing as how we've already shown over the first couple of months, they've actually increased spending as a total. It's clear that we're being played right now. Maybe it changes in a week or a month, but at the moment, we're not. There's no promises kept in that picture. This says personnel of USAID were told on Friday that all positions there not required by law would be eliminated. After the State Department notified Congress it would discontinue USAID functions that do not align with Trump administration priorities. This is new. This is from yesterday. Now it says USAID staff were informed of the decision by an internal memo. That's what everyone's pointing to, from Jeffrey Lewin, a member of billionaire Elon Musk's job-slashing DOGE efficiency group, who have been acting as the deputy administrator of the agency. Now, remember, Jeremy Levin, is a Lewin, mixing these names up. The bottom line is, guys, that these clearly, that is not in any way shutting something down. If it's still working and there are still people working there and there's still some budget, yes, you could say diminishing it, but then that's going to come to my point about whether the State Department just absorbs whatever else is going on there and they could move that however they like. Does this appear to be shutting down to you? Certainly not, again, seeing as how it hasn't happened once. But we'll just go to the other article too. This is from ABC, and where it says the State Department said Friday was officially shuttering USAID. Well, that they did say that. But what's funny is they're not actually doing that. Shuttering means discontinuing, shutting down, stopping. Even this article and the memo that they put out makes it clear that's not what's happening. I mean, am I losing my mind that these things actually matter? You can't say it's shut down when it's like Trump saying he's defeated ISIS 100%. How can we pretend like that's not the dumbest thing in the world when they also later point to ISIS and things happening other places? And you push them, they go, well, he means diminished it to the point where they're not real. Okay, then don't say 100%. Simple. I never argued there wasn't action taken. I don't know why that's not important to people. Or are we just in a place where the majority of the partisanship is willing to just pretend like facts don't matter in their own interest, which I kind of think is what we know is happening. I still argue that's not the majority of people. It says, in what could deal a final blow to the beleaguered foreign aid policy. I think the interest is convincing people that there is something shifting from both sides of your false paradigm. It says, in a memo distributed Friday to USAID employees and obtained by ABC News and everyone else, I mean, it's a memo that's being circulating, the agency's new deputy director and a former Department of Government Efficiency official wrote that the State Department, quote, intends to assume responsibility for many of USAID's functions and its ongoing programming. But again, anybody understanding the previous situation and not just waking up into Trump's narratives are aware that's already the reality. It was basically a regime change engine that had been used through the guise of helping people. And that doesn't mean they didn't in some cases help people. The bottom line is if you're simply assuming those responsibilities, the game that's being played here is, yes, we're shutting down what we call USAID over here and the independent idea of it, but the functions and, in fact, the very same thing will continue right over here. So we can play the semantics game and say, yes, it's shut down entirely, even though it's going to continue. Seems that's dumb to say, right? We could be honest and say we are simply repurposing it under the State Department, which it already was doing a long time ago, and maybe slashing the budget in some way. We'll never know that until we actually get there and look back and say, here's what happened. But that's the point as always. Everyone who wants to lean into this, like Jones, is going to say, we did it. It's over. We won. Everybody look the other way, which is kind of what he does right now. It says the State Department, quote, will seek to retire USAID's independent operation immediately and assess whether to rehire some unknown numbers of officials to, quote, assume the responsible administration of USAID's remaining life-saving and strategic aid programming. Okay, not to belabor the point here, guys. If you're rehiring people and resuming certain programs, I'm going to go ahead and take a shot in the dark and say it's not done if it's doing things. Obviously, you already know where this goes, guys. That's the same point as before. This transfer will significantly enhance, it says, efficiency, accountability, uniformity, and strategic impact of something that doesn't exist? No, in delivering foreign assistance programs. So it's still doing that. Whether you want to call it the State Department or you want to call it USAI, something else, the bottom line is that it's still doing the things that we all talked about. It's a shell game. That's what a shell game looks like. Now, look, maybe they're doing it for good reasons. Maybe this will be the move it over here game before we finally get rid of it later. Good, maybe. I'm not saying I have a crystal ball. The problem is that this is not what they're presenting it to be. And if we really stand back, of course, I'm being as objective as possible, but realize that we already see what their objectives are. We already see how they're aiming this at Iran and elsewhere and already using it to repurpose Gaza, which is part of what this will become, as at least they claim. Then we already know it's not going to go the way they say it will, or at least the indications, I should say, already present the reality or the evidence to suggest that it will not be something that just diminishes. Rather, it will be used in its more nefarious purpose, the only real purpose I think it was there for, under the State Department. All my opinion, other than what we're proving here, allowing our nation and president to speak with one voice in foreign affairs. So in other words, by the way, also consolidating, even from the illusion, by the way, but consolidating more officially the power under one element, the executive branch. Quote, it will also obviate the need for USAID to continue operating as an independent establishment. So that's all what they're highlighting right there. It's an easy win to say he shut it down like he promised, even though that's not actually what's happening. You know, and of course, simply having an objective reality of this causes all the morons on Twitter to freak out and scream things at you, but that's the world we live in today. So here's the clip, by the way. Here's the funny. This is before. This is from February 3rd. This was the first time they claimed they shut it down. Go back and look at the time frame. Libs, the TikTok, and the rest were all cheering about the shutting down of USAID. And it didn't. It got repurposed. Now they're doing it again. It's the same dynamic. But just to show you what he said then.
USAID and how this affects. Well, look, I mean, my frustration with USAID goes back to my time in Congress. It's a completely unresponsive agency. It's supposed to respond to policy directives of the State Department, and it refuses to do so. So the function...
In other words, it's not doing the things we want it to do. Not that we want to get rid of it because it's a wasteful agency that is abusing people's rights, but no, we want to use it in that way, how we want to use it. So we're going to remove the woke edge to it and simply apply a more authoritarian dynamic and achieve the same thing, or whatever you want to call it. That's the reality of this. And you can already see it, as I've already shown you, in contracts that are continuing and new ones that are starting under this administration for the same things. In some cases, even the same woke cover, at least as I see it, as a cover. Either way, also doing HIV prevention in South Africa and male circumcision in different parts of Tanzania, for example. We just went over this. Those things should matter to people who have logical consistency. If you're outraged they're funding that in Biden's administration, you should be even more outraged that people pretending they don't want that are doing so still.
Functions of USAID, there are a lot of functions of USAID that are going to continue, that are going to be part of American foreign policy, but it has to be aligned with American foreign policy. I said very clearly during my confirmation hearing that every dollar we spend and every program we fund, that will be aligned with the national interest of the United States. And USAID has a history of sort of ignoring that and deciding that there's somehow a global charity separate from the national interest. These are taxpayer dollars. And so...
Yeah, you get the point. So we're going to do it the way we want to do it. That's all you should take from that, because that's what's happening. Now, let's also not forget, and I'm not going to play it. You can watch it. It's a 6-minute video, 7 minutes from Breakthrough News. But I said, so when Rubio uses USAID to, quote, rebuild Gaza, which is what he claimed already, without the Palestinians, of course, will Republicans be able to call out this obvious deception? Israel wants to replace UNRWA with a CIA front group. Israel's foreign ministry created a task force to replace UNRWA with USAID. Now, maybe that'll shift. Maybe because it gets too much attention, they'll shift to something else. Maybe National Endowment for Democracy. Who knows? The point is, this has already been in the works. So if they're already floating this and now they're going to use the State Department, I mean, you can see how easily this would come together. And because they simply shifted away the USAID moniker, all the people, it gives the conservative Republican crowd an easy way to go, no, that's just the U.S. government helping build No, you're using USAID. You're just not calling it that. See how easy this is? How easy, I mean, the sense of just, it's like what Vanessa and I have talked about, or rather her work in particular, about how easy it is for them just to change the name of a group in Syria and pretend like it's not the same stupid group they've been funding for years. Oh, no, it's not al-Nusra anymore. It's just Hayat al-Sham now. It's all Al-Qaeda, but who cares? The same group they're literally allowing to rape and murder people in Syria and funding and supporting them right now. That's the same game. They know it works, apparently, at least on the people they need it to work for. Just had another interesting overlap to DOGE I thought was interesting, funny in a way. I keep saying this, and I pointed out before. So Elon Musk, rather Kanoa the Great, says, Obama signs DOGE-style executive orders to cut waste and promote efficiency. Okay. And Elon Musk goes, should someone do a who said it, Obama, Clinton, or DOGE? Literally impossible to tell the difference. I'm like, I don't think, the way I read this, it's like they're trying to make the point that, you guys are wrong about what we're doing to the Democrats or whoever they think they're aiming this at. Going, because they're going, you're not doing the right thing. You're lying, or you're cutting it the wrong way. Okay, he's trying to go see, but Obama proposed the same thing. It's like, okay, what's funny is the people like us, which I think is the majority, are like, yeah, you dummy, it's the government. So all you're doing is going, see, we're doing the thing you all think we're doing. Exactly, government manipulating us using policy. But what's funny is the people on his side, who are, I argue ostensibly on his side, people that are the conservative Republican crowd, are going, well, wait, we don't want to be like Obama. He's using the point to throw at them, going, see, we're not as bad as you think. But his own, I guess to the detriment of his own support base. Why would you want to argue that you're doing the same thing as Obama? Doesn't that make my point that you're all doing the same thing under a different flavor? Oops. I don't think they're really thinking that through, but who knows? And I just made the joke of it. And I said, breaking. By the way, anytime you see me write breaking, especially in all capitals, I don't think I would. Maybe there's a certain realm that I might use the word breaking for certain context, but if you see me write that, pretty much assume it's being sarcastic. Or especially if you got some red flashlights on there. Red lights. I said, breaking, Elon admits DOGE is really just Obama-style executive orders, saying it's, quote, literally impossible to tell the difference. Now, you tell me how that's not exactly what just happened there. I'm just framing it with a different side. It's, you know, if you're going to say that ours are like Obama's, the reverse logic would be Obama's is like ours, right? So it's just funny to me. All I'm trying to highlight is that if you can't see that this is the same game, like even going back to Derek, what Derek just covered in regard to the old efficiency movement, and how clearly this is just, and Taylorism, and how this is just a new example of an old liberal progressive direction for technocracy that they've just taken over under a Republican mantle. It's the same game as for anybody that I think clearly the majority of this country that are not really taking to the partisanship, maybe lean one way or the other, but see through most of it. It's kind of comical. But see, I think just like Israel desperately trying to reach just a small base of the U.S., you know, enough percentage to pretend it's everybody. Same thing the partisanship does, guys. That's a desperate thing that needs a certain percentage to pretend that they have everyone's support. That's what I see it as anyway. Jimmy Dore makes a great point. Again, we've got the DOGE point in general about how, I mean, we're supposed to be fighting the deep state, right? All this big high-minded talk in the beginning about all these big things. And what they're doing is going after the small guys. They're going after small things and small groups and small. They're not going after the power structure. They're going after things that the power structure wants them to go after, as I see it. In this case, as he writes out, this is what DOGE will never cut or even mention. He says, if Elon Musk has balls, this is what he'd be screaming about. But it's all a show because we all know the real waste, fraud, abuse is happening inside the Pentagon, the war machine. Same thing Catherine's been saying. You guys really think they're ever going to bring up the trillions of missing dollars? You think they're really ever going to go after the reality of what we all understand is somewhat connected to the shadow government, deep state apparatus? Because it's abstract. I don't think anybody can pretend they know what the real picture is there, other than people somehow involved in it, and even then it's probably completely decentralized. The point is that is where we should be starting. Getting rid of mRNA shots. How about just the COVID shot? I'm going to get into that in a second in regard to the Maha misdirection around the RFK point. But there's so many things that should be focused on. I mean, primarily things like this. He said they'll never cut any of the, and I think it's way more than this, by the way, 900 military bases the U.S. has around the world. No other country has this, not even close. China has one military base, and I would argue too on that. I bet you there's more than what we know about. But realistically, what we could verify, apparently one or a few bases outside the borders, Russia, about 20. Elon is doing sleight of hand, and so is Trump. I agree with him entirely here. They're actually increasing the Pentagon budget, which they are, despite claiming the opposite. Trump acting like he's being sarcastic to end wars quickly, sarcastic to reduce spending. I just said those things. Yeah, just like we told you. He said that, by the way. I'm sure most of the people who support him pretend like he didn't or don't want to see it for themselves. And increase spending on war or not cutting it. MAGA has been betrayed and duped. Now, I agree with that. I really do. And I keep making that point in the sense that I think most people, really on all sides of the partisanship, the majority of their bases, they want good for this country. Let's not forget that. Let's not lose sight of the reality that most people, the way they trick everybody is because they trick them into thinking they're doing the right thing. So right there, it shows you that they know most people, or at least want, whether they understand what that looks like or not, good for this country. And they've convinced you that they're the absolute epitome of evil. So you stop looking at the real manipulators in the situation. Your fellow neighbor, whatever left or right or seeing through it all, mostly I would the bet would be majority of them want good things for this country. That's why they pretend to be good. And I'm talking about however you see that. Doesn't mean they would all agree on what that outcome is. I think they have been played because they think they're getting the good things, but they're not. Now, in regard to the Maha overlap, which is one of those points, guys. I mean, the whole reason they leaned into all of that is because they knew that a large portion of them wanted this positive change in regard to removing certain dangerous vaccines, if not all of them, and going after certain groups like the EPA or removing things. In some cases, there's been inchings towards some of these positive things, but actually going after the larger problems. I don't see really any of that happening. I've seen some movement, and I'll point to a couple of the things. I mean, I'll let you hear exactly what Alex is referring to, all the different positives that everyone's ignoring, and we'll point to the reality of those things. Now, I've been clear on my opinion. From day one, in regard to RFK Jr. and the coverage around Israel, right? From day one, what did I say? In regard to after he made his stance clear, I said morally indefensible. Never once have I even faltered on that because it's the reality. Saying that you can defend what's happening there in the first week, let alone right now, morally indefensible. Now, back to the point we're going to get into, what I say from the beginning. It doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't line up. Either he's being blackmailed, he's being threatened, or he's been secretly lying to us the entire time. Either way, just the consistency is impossible. It does not make sense. And even if he has been lying the whole time, even if something did shift, the point is still the same, is that his work around that before coming into this administration, and hopefully some things after, has been monumentally positive, guys. You can't ignore that. You could argue that he did it all to trick you for now. That's certainly possible, but you have to regard the work he's done around injections or just health in general, going back a long way, has been powerful and good for this country. And I think just people in general. But that's my point has been. So how do you explain this anti-war stance and then pretending like genocide is okay? It really makes people confused. And one of my gut has always told me that there was some kind of a pressure point being applied. But I could never prove that. And still to this day, kind of jumping ahead a slight bit, I still don't think we can prove that. But there's a lot of evidence. And that's what's so frustrating for those of us that were saying this before the selection process and going, why would you pretend that's not there? And most of the people who were telling us we were black-pilled are the ones now breaking the news about this kind of, I think, a little bit light on the facts story around blackmail. Nonetheless, I'm not even remotely saying I think it's not the case. In fact, I would, if it was a betting man, I would say that it's most likely the case. But we'll go into that. So, but I wanted to talk about this around the Maha conversation because it's so interesting how much is being, there's a lot of sidestepping going on, a lot of kind of look over there, like as I call the dangling cat toy to, jump at this thing over here while this thing plays out over there. Now, one thing I think is important to highlight in a broader sense from this administration, and let's not forget that all of these health directions, the EPA, the FDA, the CDC, they're all under the auspices of RFK Jr. and the HHS. That doesn't mean he can just snap his fingers and make it immediately happen, despite the way people pretend when their people are in power. There's always, people like we're already seeing, by the way, with the FDA point. He made statements and he started the momentum, but nothing has changed as of yet. It's an ongoing thing. And that stuff can take years, and it shouldn't. My point, though, is that when you see stuff like this, there's no way to decouple this from Trump or RFK Jr., especially since I haven't seen any of them speak up and go, that can't be okay. So this is Zeldin from the 27th. EPA offers industrial polluters a way to avoid rules on mercury, arsenic, and other chemicals. Now, it's one of those I told you so moments, because when we all were screaming about the removing regulation, everyone's trying to pretend that's going to somehow benefit the little guy, right? It's going to stop you from having to put a rail in your house. Yes, that's not how that's going to work, guys. If it's profitable for the system, those things remain. What this is about increasing the I was going to say profit for larger companies. The point is about simply making these things not applicable to big business, which, by the way, Trump has been wildly consistent ever since whether in politics or not. He is a big business guy, removing things, even though they're obviously in the right direction because it helps people make money. And then trying to argue that at the end of the day, that's what's best for this country. Guys, that's just not true, especially since it almost never comes back to the little guy, the average person, the middle class, whatever that even means today. So this is, in my opinion, entirely bad. There's no way around this. You guys tell me what you think. Here's the article. It says, as part of a push to roll back dozens of environmental regulations, the Trump administration is offering coal-fired power plants and other industrial polluters, kind of like the group that would, like the biolab company that was polluting people in North Carolina, in Conyers, Georgia. Right? That's exactly what we're talking about, guys. A company that was allowed to continue to do that for so long that it caused so many dangerous fires, including the last one that apparently had one of the, if not the one of the largest dioxin releases in American history. As according to Scott Smith and the rest of the evidence that literally nobody wants to talk about, apparently. The point is that that's what we're talking about, is a company that's allowed to do that because nobody, remember we talked about it when that guy after the guy died who was trying to give testimony about that right outside he left the building? And there was conversation about a lake in the area that was bubbling out green water. Why did that never get talked about? We're always just, the point is that the reason that's allowed to happen is because nobody is either enforcing or there's no regulation stopping them from poisoning the people in this town. Who knows why? When you dive into the biolab company, there's some pretty weird connections to people in high places. And nobody, still, as far as I tell, nothing's actually happened there. So he says the Trump administration is offering coal-fired power plants and other industrial polluters a chance for exemptions from requirements to reduce emissions of toxic chemicals such as mercury, arsenic, and benzene. Now, the effort here from partisan games I'm already seeing is to connect this back to some climate change hysteria. It's not what we're talking about. the reduction of releasing of things like mercury, arsenic, and benzene, even which overlaps with the conversation from East Palestine, is important. Because these are companies that are doing their practices allow these dangerous things to be released. And there are, whether it's not, I wouldn't call these Biden era things. That's how they're trying to frame it. The point is, these have been long worked on from people like RFK Jr. to get them to have to stop the practices that allow these things to hurt their people that live right around these buildings, if not the entire state. And what does that do? Well, of course, it causes them to have to spend more money to do it in a way that does not allow that. So if you can't make it a profitable business, then don't do it. I don't care what your product is. At the end of the day, the argument that we need something so bad that people should be harmed by it, that's the same thing to do with these dangerous injections that they're still allowing to roll out, even though they promised something would change. It's the same logic. Well, we have to give them immunity or they won't make injections anymore. Good. Then don't make them. If you can't make a product if you make a product that has to be protected from liability because it hurts so many people, maybe you shouldn't make that product. Or maybe you should demand they make it better, instead of giving them the ability to not make it better because they, don't have to. It's the same stupid thing. Now the Environmental Protection Agency has set up an electronic mailbox to allow regulated companies to request, get this, a presidential exemption. So basically they send an email to Donald Trump, and you know how that goes. Under the Clean Air Act it says to exemption under the Clean Air Act to a host of Biden-era rules. Of course, the Clean Air Act, typical how this stuff works. The Patriot Act that has nothing patriotic about. So this is basically an email chain. I think they call it down here. I'll come back to it. They had a name they called it, like a polluter something. The bottom line is that you're able to reach out to Donald Trump and say, hey, I need an exemption for X, Y, and Z. I guarantee you all related to think that whether he likes the company, whether it's more something that's pro what he likes, or at the end of the day, simply something that is going to make more money. It seems that none of the concern is about whether these things will hurt people in the area, which was the reason they were there in the first place. It's not Biden related. It's simply health related. Companies were asked to send an email by Monday seeking permission from President Trump to bypass new restrictions. The Clean Air Act enables the president to temporarily exempt industrial sites from new rules if the technology required to meet them is not widely available. Oh yeah, it's tough for them. Sorry guys, it's tough. So about that's not our concern. Then find a way to make the business work in the new model or don't do it. And it says if the continued activity is in the interest of national security. Oh, and there it is. That's an anything's catch-all. So if they claim what they are doing is an interest of what they think is national security, and that, of course, because it's national security, they're not under any obligation to break down why it meets that frame, then good, then do it. This is how the argument goes. And of course, all under what they call the Clean Air Act, the act that allows them to then not allow the clean air to, or rather not allow this to be, how do I even frame that? An act that's not helping the air stay clean, which is typically how that works. It says exemptions would be allowed for 9 EPA rules issued by the Biden administration. Now, yes, that's my point. It did come out under the Biden administration, but let's realize that people like RFK and others have been working at this no matter what administration for a very long time. Because the reality is, and I'm not saying him in particular, but groups in that vein, because this is important to everybody. This is not some kind of a side issue. It's about companies doing things, the practice. This is like pretending that Teflon, when they found out that it was giving pregnant women cancer on the line, that wasn't a big deal because, it makes more money. Well, yes, it was. Everyone lost their minds, and they should have, because they were killing people and deforming children, and they knew what they were doing. Or DuPont, or which is the same story, or any number of examples. This happens all the time. Or Agent Orange, or, the things where they find out later that they're problematic. So now the problem is we know these things are causing damage, and they're giving them exemptions for money. Now it says that the exemptions were including limits on mercury, ethylene oxide, which seems very relevant to that overlaps with the COVID story. That overlaps with a lot of different things, and other hazardous air pollutants. God, I shudder to find out what that category includes. How much you want to bet things like dioxins and PFAS? It says mercury exposure can cause brain damage, especially in children. Fetuses are vulnerable to birth defects via exposure in a mother's womb. But it's okay, though, as long as you got some national security justification, whatever that means. This is a smaller point in the scale of a lot of what's going on, but it just shows you the direction we're talking about. This should not be okay with people saying they want to make America healthy again. This is make America less healthy for the profit. That's what this is. It says, quote, companies can now apply for a gold-plated get out of your permit free card. This is one of the people reporting on this, saying, adding that the latest action marked at least the third time the EPA has moved, Zeldin specifically, has moved to weaken enforcement of environmental laws since he took office with, nearly less than 2 months ago. Yeah, exactly. Consistently in the wrong direction. Maha, you should call this out. Now, another health-related notes. This brings us into the RFK point. I just want to point a few things out. I just think it's interesting the way that these kind of, circle the wagons, extreme partisans do when there's any kind of a thing here. This is Walter Kurt saying, now that Candace Owens and Ian Carroll are also attacking Maha movement, which is just funny to frame it that way. Two people that, by the way, have been predominantly supportive of that. And now that they call something else out, there's enough to at least have a conversation about it. Is it now attacking the Maha movement? It's like, no, they're going after people who are potentially compromised. You can disagree with them. The Maha movement is something they both clearly support, but this is them trying to turn the movement against them because they call out the people that they're trying to protect. That's what I see it as. But it says, can we finally admit they're just fully opposed to President Trump and his agenda? Which is hilarious to me, seeing as how a lot of people in the independent media in the middle, even people on left and right, seem to call out at least Ian a lot as somebody who's going for that blindly. So it's just kind of funny. This is what partisanship becomes. Self-serving, subjective assumption at everything, right? If somebody goes against that, well, he's probably completely blind. And everyone seems to be calling Ian Carroll a completely compromised something from all sides. And maybe they're all right. Maybe one's right. Who knows? You can decide for yourself. But I think it's interesting to keep seeing that. The more it continues, the more I keep thinking he's just somebody who just is kind of being used by a lot of sides, and he's just going through it like he thinks is important. You can decide for yourself. At the end of the day, I think it's funny how all sides kind of converge and circle the wagons. That's how this works. Why does anyone take these people seriously? It's just funny. I'm willing to bet you people like this were leaning into some of the work he was doing weeks ago when it was something they thought was interesting. But it says, what exactly do they support that aligns with Trump? Well, if you look at their work, it's like almost everything else, but that's not the conversation we're going to have. But Insurrection Barbie says they're attacking Maha movement for what? I mean, I could probably go off 15. I could list off, well, we will in a second, is the point about some of the things Alex says. A lot of things that you could be going after the movement or lack thereof in regard to the government side of it. But that's not, their interest is about protecting the movement no matter what, as I see it anyway. Now, funny, I was going to do this after the RFK part, but because of the health overlap, I decided to do this first. So next, we're going to get into the RFK blackmail discussion, okay? But I think it's funny is that right as this kind of pops off, the same day, by the way, or the yesterday into today, I said, funny how when RFK Jr. is getting called out for being blackmailed by Israel, Alex Jones rushes to create a counter narrative almost like it's his job. Here's what came out. While everyone's over here talking about this, he breaks the story. RFK Jr. is 100% for real. That's the title. Look out, NWO death cult. Unless you're rolling out the North American Union, then Alex is going to pull his punch and look over there and yell about Europe, right? But it says RFK Jr. removes FDA vaccine chief pushing misinformation and lies. Now, I am clearly no supporter of Dr. Marks, Peter Marks. I've called him out throughout for plenty of overlaps. What's funny, though, is this also seems to be a misrepresentation. The best I can tell, anyway. Because I don't know the internal dynamics, and all you get is the reports that are coming out about it. My point is, this appears to be something where the guy resigned, and that's what literally everyone's reporting. I haven't seen. I looked to try to find more that like him saying something. I couldn't find it, at least at the moment. But it says the senior health official who was seen as a guardrail against any future politicization of the FDA, I doubt that, approved, has resigned abruptly. Now, look for yourself. This is what literally everyone's reporting, even right-leaning platforms. So it's interesting. You could argue that he pressured him out, but this is the kind of thing I was saying earlier. If he resigned, pointing at RFK Jr., then the argument that he removed him is kind of dishonest, right? Now it says in his resignation, it's right there. See, if you remove somebody, they're not resigning, I guess. But again, as always, you could argue that was the way they played it, right? You're fired, but I'll let you resign publicly. That's certainly possible. My point is, it's funny how easy it is to just frame things the way you want to. But the main point is, RFK's 100% for real, because this guy resigned saying RFK Jr. was a liar. Kind of seems like you're trying to, pave the road the way you want to, as opposed to highlighting how it went down in a way. Like my idea clear is, I think Marx is a complete, asset of the mainstream dynamic. RFK Jr., it's up in the air at the very least. Clearly mainstream Israel, but RFK, Alex seems to be kind of pulling the punch for him everywhere he can. But we'll point to something right here. So here is what he said. Same day as he just was like, for real, 100%, all this is coming out. Now, let's be real. Aside from what evidence we'll get into, if the little there is around this story, if you can't already see by now the overwhelming evidence that he is blinding himself to Israel or is so supportive of it that he doesn't, I mean, again, this is not a subjective conversation. Israel's committing war crimes, according to every single body that has any standing in that conversation, and he is pretending it's not happening. Both these people are. I'm going to play a clip from the, actually, I don't even think I downloaded that actually, but there, the Dave Smith basically asking about this and he just kind of goes blank. Candace played a clip of him basically just railing against RFK Jr. about how this is like biblically evil. And it's just kind of gross the way it's obvious that he doesn't want to answer the questions. So anybody who's being real about this, you have to argue that what he's doing is either he supports what Israel's doing over there, which is disgusting, or something's affecting his decision-making process. So let's just say that's my take on it. Here's what Alex had to say, just the first couple parts of it.
I'm out here hiking Saturday morning, met with my buddy Sean, and we were both already on X watching Candace Owens and Ian Carroll, literally watching the same video of him talk about Candace. Then we just hiked for an hour or so, and we're listening to her. And so I'm just going to respond to this. I think Candace Owens is a great person, super smart, super funny, super witty. So is Ian Carroll. And I think all the investigations they do and the things that they research are really helpful to society. And they're coming from what they do from a place of really trying to make the world a better place. And we really should have open debate about everything. That said, this whole
as people up, as an old saying goes, everything before the word but.
RFK Jr. thing with, there's these women and people at events saying he's with women, and if this is going on, there's this writer over here that, attacked Candace Owens and, Rabbi Shmuley, who is a demon. And I don't like the fact that Kennedy said such nice things about him. It's ridiculous.
Think about how wild it is to support these people completely. But he's a demon though, right? So he completely leans into a demon, but that's okay though, because, he's got the right things going for him. I don't know how you can go along with that. A demon, right? So it's okay that he's being controlled by a demon. At the very least, would that affect the way that you frame this? It just seems pretty strange to me that that's the kind of statement somebody could make, and that's not like completely shocking to people.
So you do have to ask what's going on there. But Kennedy's always supported Israel. And me personally, I don't like the whole Palestinian thing and Iran and Hezbollah, and I also don't like the stuff Israel's doing. Israel clearly stood down on October 7th. You know me, I don't
brush over the genocide though, right? Clearly stood down. Yes, that's publicly acknowledged by literally everybody. The whole Palestinian thing and Hezbollah. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's insulting to brush over that story, a century of genocide. Like he basically both sidesed that story, which just there's not an honest overview of that, even in a quick overview for this point. I just want to point that out. This is him trying to pretend that he's somehow, calling out Israel, and he is pulling every possible punch for Israel, like I think this is too. But that's the way he plays this. It's kind of like, Trump may be a liar, but let me go on for 6 hours why he's your savior. So kind of the everything before but point applies to pretty much everything he does, I think.
I think that's the biggest problem in the world. I spent some of my time on it, but
let me go back. And this is where he gets into this kind of downplaying of the Israel story, which, let's be clear again, I'm going to go through this like we had before, but more specifically around just we need to recognize that Zionism, not Israel, which that's it's like saying only Jewish people, but yes, Jewish people does overlap with Zionism, just like Christians do. It's not just Israel, as we can see today. Clearly, it's not just Israel, but Israel is a central point for Zionism. But there is a lot of people in Israel, not the minority, not the majority, a lot of Jews, a lot of Israelis who are calling it all out, right? So it's not, when they try to pocket it in just Israel or Jewish people, that's the ploy, okay? This is about Zionism. It's funny, I didn't mean to stop it on his face like that. So that when you try to make it about something else, you try to make it like we're obsessed with it, that's very suspicious to me, okay? Because the reality is Zionism, wherever you see it in the world, is clearly the issue of our times, guys. You could disagree with that, but you have to see this, in my opinion, as something that is central to, I mean, what's story happening right now? Everywhere you're looking is not in some way interconnected with their political ideology, as what Zionism is rolling out through Israel. I mean, there's more Christian Zionists today than there are Jewish Zionists. We have to realize this is not something that the way they pocket it. Now listen to what he says.
And Iran and Hezbollah, and also don't like the stuff Israel's doing. Israel clearly stood down on October 7th. You know me, I don't think that's the biggest problem in the world. I spent some of my time on it, but millions dead.
Some of your time on it? No, hardly. But my point, though, is that even then, you don't have to think it's the biggest story in the world. But if you pretend like it's some kind of a small side story, or you spent what we've seen up until the election overlap, saying, why are you even talking about Israel? And then they all lurch into Europe, right? It is a game.
And also don't like the stuff Israel's doing. Israel clearly stood down on October 7th. You know me, I don't think that's the biggest problem in the world. I spent some of my time on it, but millions dead in Ukraine, Europe, the UK and France openly sending troops now to fight Russia, and Putin saying it'll be a bloodbath. We're ready for total war.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, that's the same war that he told you weeks ago was completely done and over. We did it. We won. I'm literally not making that up. I should have found the clip. We did it. It's over. Ukraine's done. I told promises made, promises kept. I think he actually tweeted that. But now we're not. See, clearly funny how that works. Funny how people don't look back and go, well, that was crazy lie. But at the end of the day, do we not recognize that that's completely immersed in the same U.S.-Israeli dynamic? It's what it is, guys. How do we not see? Anybody with a brain can see the overlap to Syria and how that was used for this very conversation. Now Israel's occupied Syria and has built bases, deployed troops. Guess we forgot to report about that, huh, Alex? Or the overlap to the reality they're funding the Azov movement, which was used to create the whole dynamic. Now, there's other agendas involved, yes. But if you try to decouple those things, you're just being dishonest. And that's why it does come back to the ideology. Don't you forget that they said we're going to turn Ukraine into a big Israel. They've every way they can. Same with Syria now, telling you that it's obvious what's driving this bus. They're just ignoring it.
That's getting about 1% of the coverage of just this total Israel obsession. So from my perspective, I'm just so sick of being on air 30 years and people always being obsessed with Israel, the Christian Zionists that just worship it and think it can do no wrong, no matter who's in charge there. The other side that just thinks everything's run by Jews. I'm just freaking tired of it, okay? I get attacked by the Israel lobby. I get attacked by the Nazis. I just can't stand any of it.
Yeah, sure sounds like a back and forth, or when you realize that it's all the same side. Yeah, then it becomes a lot more clear. Now, that's not to say that everybody on every side is all. The point is that what he's highlighting there, the radical Christian Zionists that are blindly supporting Israel, the ones that think it's all about Jewish people, that's the same conversation. That is a Zionism manipulation. The rest of us in the world are beginning to recognize that the creation, like screaming in everyone's face that this is the state of the Jews and it's all about the Jewish people. And then people turn around going, but then the Jewish people did this. They go, well, you're a racist. Well, didn't you just get done telling me that, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that's the ploy right there, to get people to fall into the trap of blindly thinking that it's only Jewish people, so you could turn around and claim that they have to exist to fight off the evil anti-Semitism that's building around the world. But when he highlights it like that, the reality is you can prove that the ADL, for example, was caught creating fake Nazi marches in Skokie, Illinois. We've gone over all of this. You think he doesn't see this stuff? They don't post it for him? And so if you can stand back and realize the manufacturing of this divide to usher in exactly what we're dealing with and to pretend like that's some obsession. This is why I've always been highlighting this example and what this person is more so today than ever, because this is important to how they've continued to sway people away from the central point. It is like ultimately keeping you focused in on some relevant aspects of something, but as long as you miss the real outcome, as long as you miss the main point, it's like saying with Q, right? They don't care what questions you're asking or how's it go? They don't. They don't care what questions you ask. They don't care what answers you find as long as you're asking the wrong questions or something like that. It's like they keep you down the wrong path, so you feel like you're finding things, but at the end of the day, it's not relevant to the real point.
What I'm into is policy and real results.
Yeah, so am I. That's the main thing. Outcome and integrity. But that's obviously not what they're doing, as they keep getting caught lying about what's actually happening and are blindly supportive of one side, regardless of what they do, right? See, this is how emulating the right thing while not doing it.
The fruits of the tree, as Christ said. I'm a Christian. And if you look at what RFK Jr. is doing, they killed the new COVID shot rollout. They just fired that guy at HHS that was...
Okay, let's just deal with those two first. This is why I wanted to keep it on the health-related side. I don't know why that's not going back. StreamYard's killing me. All right, so the obviously the FDA guy resigned. Now you could argue he got pushed out, but everyone else is claiming he resigned. So I think that's a false win, but let's just say he fired him, fine. The point is the argument that they stopped the rollout of the COVID shot seems to be flatly false. Now, this is just a quick search. It says there's no specific information in the provided context about RFK Jr. directly killing the rollout of a new COVID shot. That seems interesting. And I looked this up and didn't. People all talking about Mark's resigning, which seems to be all over the conversation. But just a quick overview, you can find that they're absolutely rolling out a single collaboration shot for COVID-19, cold, MERS, flu. I mean, these are all over the place. And yes, it is currently rolling out under the Trump administration. New COVID shot for 2025 is already in effect. The CDC recommends currently that everyone 12 years or older get the new 2024-2025 Novavax COVID-19 vaccine. Oh, and just in case you thought I was just going off with Brave, no, it's right there, right on the main CDC website. This is from January of 2025. Okay, that's so currently still updated as of Trump's administration in 2025, and everyone, it says, should get the 2024 into 2025 COVID-19 vaccine. So was it discontinued? No, they're still actively supporting it. So it's funny how people can go along with what you frame for them, even though it's not true. We'll come back to these.
Stuff. They've already put the notice in that all the thousands of chemicals that are in foods that have this grandfather clause that they can be poisonous and deadly and addictive, and there's no testing or no rules, that's being taken out. And they're all starting to pull the garbage out, the poison dyes, all of it.
Okay, well, is that happening? As best I can tell, that's just him saying what they claim is going to be happening, maybe. Typical. But this is just one of the many articles. RFK Jr. seeks to end rule allowing food companies to bypass FDA, right? So as far as I can see, this is happening. And I was praising this. I think this is a great step. But at the moment, as far as I can tell, I'm saying remember, how long we've talked about this. It's either gas or generally accepted as safe or something like that. The rule allows companies to self-approve the inclusion of additives in food items without requiring a review of the approval of the FDA. The rule enables manufacturers to add ingredients even if the FDA is not determined its safety. Sort of like the dangerous mRNA shots that no one wants to call out Trump's still rolling out. But it says on Monday, HHS, RFK Jr. directed the acting FDA commissioner to explore the possibility of eliminating the self-affirmed GRAS pathway available to companies. Quote, this will enhance the FDA's oversight of ingredients considered. Okay. So as far as I can tell, and if you have more information, you send it my way. This is how far we've come so far. We're exploring how that may happen. Isn't that a bit dishonest to frame that they're already doing things? Maybe it has, and it has. I think that's great. I wasn't able to find that. I looked pretty deep today and couldn't find anything other than the idea of what we may do. And if it happens, that's fantastic. But this is the counterbalance framing of why the other parts aren't important, and everyone so far has actually been not true, as far as I could tell. That seems relevant to me.
They're going after aspartame. They're going after all the GMO stuff. I mean, this is a real revolution. RFK Jr. has been doing this for decade after decade after decade and targeting real environmental crises, cleaning up toxic waste spills, stuff that actually matters.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's what I was just saying. But by the way, the purported RFK Jr. post about the GMO ban was actually from a parody account. But funny how that stuff works out. Now, look, I've heard him call it GMOs too, but guess what? The mRNA shots are literally GMO products. So let's not keep pretending that narrative will win the day. How about we do our due diligence and recognize that people like that are literally, their job is to deceive you. Of course, that's my opinion. I honestly hope I'm wrong. I don't want there to be people out there misleading anybody. The sad reality is a lot of that is happening. Now, this is where this gets interesting, right? Because on the right side of this conversation, Alex Jones is leading people into the golden age of the Trump administration as they're rolling you into technocratic prisons. Ian Carroll has been pretty wildly pro RFK and Trump, like up until the election, and has kind of rapidly been calling a lot of these things out, which, as always, there's a lot of people out there that are jumping to conclusions. I think there's plenty of suspicious reasons about somebody who rises to influence this fast and all these different things that happen. I've expressed plenty of skepticism around this person. But nonetheless, as I've always said, I don't think we can prove one way or the other at this point. But I think what's interesting is that he has clearly continued to call things out in ways right now that seem to be kind of frustrating other Republicans. So take it for what you will. That is interesting, and that leans in the direction away from potentially, unless that's just to win your side. I mean, but the point is, until we know for sure with any of these things, Alex, myself, anybody, guys, you don't know, then let's not keep screaming we know one way or the other. That he's paid for this or he's a shill for that. Who knows? Consider it always, but look, end with what you can prove. So in this case, we have Ian Carroll putting out this story. This was yesterday, 5.4 million views. And that's what Alex was commenting on, that it's kind of like, well, they're good people and they do good things, but basically this is not the right thing, is what he was getting at, right? So let's watch this. Now, this is him breaking down an overlap of the information, which I thought was just the quickest way to get all the small things out around this. And from Candace Owens' show, which is this right here. Here's the full link for if you want to watch it. It's I believe it was over an hour, and it's just about her breaking down the story. He kind of encapsulates some of it, overlaps with the RFK Jr. point. Again, you'll see what you can look at the information. It seems to be kind of subjective. Doesn't mean meaningless, right? But it's interesting timing for this story to come out the way that it did, and really kind of rooted in something that really wasn't secret. So I'll play it. I'll try to stop that often. You guys tell me what you think about this and whether this is breaking information about him being blackmailed for Israel, which is the point, or, by Israel rather, or if this is an effort to sort of stymie the conversation as something that is not proven. Or maybe this is just him doing what he thinks is best and somebody else is manipulating him. I mean, that's always these possibilities. I do think a huge part of the independent mainstream alternative media are people that are jumping at the shadows presented to them. In some cases, it does have meaning. In other cases, it's just a way to deviate you, but it's just people going through what they think is in front of them. And I think, from my perspective, how often I talk about the erring on the side of objectivity. When I fall short myself. But it's about trying, as we jokingly call it, irritatingly objective. And the reason I said that is because today we see why that's necessary. Because people acting with good intention can easily be misled if they don't have that guidance of strict principles. That if we can't prove it, we don't go any further, right? If we don't know, we don't take that. It's very simple. So that's why you see people like this that I think, rise to incredibly fast. I think it's because they're in some ways being led along. I mean, he was a pretty strong cheerleader for the Trump administration before the selection process. Maybe that was all it was about. The point is, be objective, consider it for what you will.
The Bobby Kennedy blackmail story is currently breaking in many directions all across the internet, and American politics is not going to be the same after this weekend. That's not hyperbole. This is not just a hook.
I do think that's a large, I think that's a bit overblowing what he will present. You can decide for yourself.
And I don't really know where to start. But this is the kind of story that I've gotten enough calls from enough people tonight, and there's enough going on that I feel like we need to make a video right now to keep some people safe and to get as much as we all know out on the internet right now so that everyone can be safe.
That's the other thing, by the way, that I wanted to just get out before we play it all, is it's kind of odd to me that this is being framed as like the journalists are in danger, which is kind of counterintuitive. Like the journalists are the ones that are supposed to be putting themselves in danger to protect the source. To me, this argument in this, that it's something we have to do this because journalists are in danger, it feels like a weird way to frame this. But maybe, again, this is just, he's just a guy on the internet. Like he doesn't ever claim to be a big journalist, or that kind of does say that about himself in this video, but that he's been the one that has self-expressed the fact that he's new to this, and he's kind of, that keep that in mind. But it's interesting though, that if we're talking about the people who are covering this story, and almost in a way that there's more information that they're not putting out because they think they're at risk, like that's the opposite of what should be happening here. I mean, the idea is that we should be breaking the information for people to know it. And my opinion is that the more you put it out publicly, the safer you are, as opposed to having information that they might want to stop from being shown, kind of a thing.
And the best place for everyone to start is at Candace's video that she put up today, that she very aptly titled "One Nation Under Blackmail." Go watch it. She does a way better job of explaining a bunch of what's going on than I could. But as soon as I was like 10 minutes into it, and then I started getting phone calls from sources telling me more information that is corroborating and taking it even further than what is exposed in that video.
Okay, I'm sorry, I do have to say one thing there too. I keep forgetting where I wanted to stop. This is very kind of telling to me. And it kind of does lean into the possibility that this is somebody who's being kind of led by the nose, which is the idea that, so you're watching this video, as Alex and everybody else was saying, we were hiking and we're watching these two videos. That's kind of the thing that's overtaking. And he gets a bunch of calls. Okay, so I think it's kind of self-explanatory that is not source material. People saying things over the phone that confirms what you think is going on. And I'm going to show you that this all seems to be very kind of superficial in a lot of ways, not in any way saying that. I mean, my thought is that, like I said, I think I established at the beginning that whether this is it or not, that I do think he's in some way being manipulated or he's always been deceiving. But I think it's easy to see how somebody like this could get the call from the person that has a lot of influence that says, I know this for sure. And all of a sudden that becomes second confirmation. And, you know, I do think there's a very clear kind of infrastructure of how they drip these things out through certain controlled, in many ways, people that don't know that aspects. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying I even think that about him. I'm completely I'm honestly right down the middle right now. I'm not sure what I think about Ian. I do think some of the things he does have pretty positive effects on the outcome, but I also see a lot that makes me very worried. Now, I'll play some clips from Derek Rose in a minute.
And I have sources telling me that there are people in like media and around Bobby that know about this and know it's coming and are trying to protect him and save him from this. But it is past that, and there is no saving anyone from this, I think. And we just have to deal with what's about to happen. So I'm going to leave all of that out, and we're going to start the story here with our girl Jessica, House and Habit. She had tasked one of her writers, Emily Hagan, with writing a hit piece about Candace Owens. They were trying to create or dig up some dirt on Candace's husband for some reason to take her down. For reasons we'll kind of get to in a second. Emily submitted a draft kind of, and Jessica, House and Habit, was having her girl, I believe Olivia Nuzzi, read through it, and it was like, we can't publish that, it's too 4chan-y. House and Habit clarified that it needs to be a clean shot. A clean shot to take down Candace Owens. Good fucking luck with that. If you don't remember who Olivia Nuzzi is, she's the woman that had the sexting scandal with RFK last year, who then cozied up to House and Habit for reasons that are not entirely clear, and sort of started secretly editing there behind the scenes and kind of replacing people and getting really close to Jessica Reed Krause, House and Habit, for reasons that are still not entirely clear as far as I'm aware. To be fair, there's a lot that is not entirely clear because this is so complicated, and everything in this video is hearsay and rumors. And obviously, when they tried to come to Candace and it created all this drama, and Candace don't take no fucking shit, and Jessica had been super mean to the writer of the article and that had then fired her. And so her and Emily had all this drama, and then her other best friend, and it had gotten super fucking vitriolic, and eventually Emily was like, fuck it.
Hey, sorry guys. I definitely always give a heads up for cursing. I spaced. I was here. I'm sorry about that. So he cusses obviously throughout this video. So if you have chills around, earmuffs, I apologize for that.
And rumors. And obviously when they tried to come to Candace and it created all this drama, and Candace don't take no fucking shit, and Jessica had been super mean to the writer of the article and that had then fired her. And so her and Emily had all this drama, and then her other best friend, and it had gotten super fucking vitriolic. And eventually Emily was like, fuck it. I'm just going to go to Candace and come clean and say what's going on. That's how we got this video. And I was only...
Now, up until this point, and you can watch Candace's video. This is why it's an encapsulation of what she's just kind of discussing, and she shows the same screenshots. I don't know how you'd ever prove any of this, right? In the context of her coming to her. So basically she comes to Candace and reveals the information. Right, so that's where we are. This is everything up until that point, as far as I can tell, has pretty much already been public. The background of this already at least being discussed from RFK, you know, so the argument being that this is where the kind of blackmail develops. I kind of agree with the larger sentiment today that seems like a pretty milquetoast thing, especially with what he's been saying out publicly, even, and that's already been sort of discussed, you know, for that to, I guess, if a tape came out showing him sexting with some woman, I mean, I guess with the position they're in, it probably would be used against him pretty obviously. But I don't know if that would go to the level of blackmail by an Israeli government to allow what's happening. You see what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. But my overarching point as we continue is that it seems to be rooted in a lot of subjectivity right now.
Only 15 minutes into this video when I started getting interrupted by all kinds of calls from all kinds of people all over the country that have more information about this.
And let's not forget that how often this has happened, and just since 2024 or 5 forward, around these popping off partisan stories where everyone's got a take, and 80% of them turn out to be BS. Drones and fog and whatever else we've talked about, where a lot of these jumping partisan screamers will reach into the story and be like, my secret sources. We saw that with Sean Ryan, right? So just ask yourself whether that, I mean, let's just make a point, whether it's this or not, every time that happens. So people are opportunists. They're grifters. They jump in. They want to add, they, leak this to, however it works. This is how we always have to consider that's part of the stories when we see these partisan stories kick off. And really, I shouldn't even make it up partisanship. It's just people there's always going to be a dishonest person that tries to benefit from a situation. So just consider that, especially what we see today in partisanship.
Because this story is way past the point of no return. And it is way bigger than some girl drama. So at the second Trump Butler rally in July of last year, House and Habit was hanging out with some of the people that I know and apparently receiving a bunch of phone calls all about this blackmail situation with the Olivia Nuzzi sexting scandal. And while she was taking calls, she was kind of filling them in excitedly on the story as she was getting it, kind of as though she was going to write a piece about it. And what they were told is that it was many, 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 many instances of recorded video sexting stuff. They were told in some form that Olivia Nuzzi's husband was in on recording it, whether that is him tapping her phone or her and him as a husband-wife couple kind of targeting him.
I'll show you what at least Brave's AI response says about that in particular. That seems at least to be suggested that it was kind of a forced situation between the two, which I'll go into why I think that's interesting in regard to the overlap with potential sexual blackmail operations.
Olivia Nuzzi did insert herself into the RFK campaign, and then all this stuff happened. And then when I was at Rescue the Republic event just a few months later, I was hearing all kinds of rumors, and a lot of people were hearing rumors about dick pics that were apparently coming out that never came out. I suspect that that was a misunderstanding of this story sort of being kind of rumored around.
Or they were all wrong about a different story, right? It's like that's how often we can see these rumblings of nonsense that go around partisan circles that never become stories, because there's a lot of dishonesty in partisan circles. So it's certainly possible that they misunderstood this story, which, by the way, makes them also sharing wrong information then, but also that they could have just been wrong about a different story. Same point, I think.
So what we got was a story that Olivia Nuzzi and him had a romantic, emotional connection over the phone that had caused her, it was inappropriate, and he apologized, and so she left the campaign sort of, and then went and got real cozy with House and Habit, who had a lot of details, who was rad. I don't know what happened there, but I know that what a very trusted person on my end told me that they heard at that event was that it was not just that, it was recordings of video sex.
So somebody he trusts who told him that they heard. That doesn't mean false, by the way, but let's just be real. Now, look, it's like I said to begin, nobody's under some obligation to adhere to what I argue is what we should all be doing when we present information, okay? But it is important to highlight this for this kind of grouping that does continually, as even this video, frame themselves as the journalists breaking the news. So just consider that. But this, and even then, there's plenty of journalists out there that use secondhand information in their reporting. But I just want to be clear and objective about this. And there's more to come. I just think it's interesting that is the way the story has gone, and it is reverberating through the conversation today. While there's a lot of very provable things happening, that's one of the larger obvious points today.
There's also a lot of swirling rumors of other people that he's been having sex with that are very heartbreaking and inappropriate.
By the way, someone in the chat, I do want to point out, hearsay, secondhand information, that still counts as evidence, guys. Evidence is just a data point. Evidence can be falsified. I say it all the time. So consider that. Proof is different. But evidence is just, somebody said they heard this from somebody. That's a piece of evidence that you're supposed to investigate to suss out the relevance of, if any.
But I started to wonder, who might Olivia Nuzzi and possibly her husband, if they had that, who might they have passed such blackmail to? Either sold it or been sent by some group. And you need look no further than her Wikipedia page to learn that in 2013, just out of university, actually while still in university, she volunteered as an intern for Anthony Weiner's New York City mayoral campaign. If you don't know about Anthony Weiner, look it up. And that is a direct tie to Huma Abedin and to Hillary Clinton, and to, at that point, just pick your term for whatever deep state groups you want to talk about. That blackmail could be anywhere.
Okay, now this is my point about the kind of, right, so that's a huge jump. Just if we're going to be objective about this and be actual journalists about this, that is a big assumptive jump. Obviously, ties to Hillary Clinton should not be ignored. Obviously, ties to people like Weiner should not be ignored because of how often these people have been caught up in these scandals and are connected to the same kind of infrastructure, right? But it doesn't prove that just because she went to the same location as, or what was the exact framing? It was, she was 20-year-old junior at the university when she volunteered as an intern for Anthony Weiner. So just because she was an intern for him does not therefore prove that today that makes her compromised. It definitely could. And I'm not saying he's saying that proves it, but I just think that's important. That's a huge leap of logic there to say that that connection means that this is where the blackmail ended up, if even actually is the case. Right? So let's keep going.
She volunteered as an intern. That is a direct tie to, I think we all know, Hillary Clinton, and to, at that point, just pick your term for whatever deep state groups you want to talk about.
And then, you know, this kind of abstract deep state groups, you know, I mean, he was the one on Joe Rogan that was kind of belittling David Icke's perspective and Webb's kind of Whitney Webb's unhinged perspective on technocracy. Meanwhile, making this kind of a, you know, I mean, obviously, and he did say in that conversation that it's not just one group of people on a table. And I agree with that. But it ultimately, if you really go far enough, it really does ultimately come back to a centrally controlling structure, or maybe a certain grouping of powerful people. The overarching point, though, is that the deep state is an abstract idea, right? It's not a certain, the way it's become today is even as Benjamin Netanyahu showing you right now, clearly picking up on it, or showing you that he handed down the narrative that he's fighting the deep state now. That's all that's happening. Don't worry about anything else. That's what he's literally saying now, even though the reality is he's destroying this country from within, that his own people are saying. So the group aspect is just kind of a problem in the way they frame it that way, that it's, you know, my point is that Democrats and Republicans are simply pointing at certain ideas, that they're the problem, instead of the reality of all of our power structure being manipulated by this kind of unelected bureaucracy, many of which we're now seeing show their faces in front. That's how I see it anyway. But to just say that there's a connection to Clinton, therefore you choose what group you want to demonize, I don't like that.
That blackmail could be anywhere by now, but I think we all know who has it. And Candace certainly knows who has it.
I'm pretty sure, obviously, he's insinuating Israel. But again, I would agree that's logical, but I don't know why we would say we all know that's who has it. Even though you trust me, I know you know my opinions are probably pretty clear. I don't think we can prove that. But see, right now you're going to get the conversation on the internet where there are people who are 100% certain that this is the case because of this video. Or alternatively, people that are saying that he's completely, you know, making things up. But it's interesting how this partisan game works today.
All that we're all doing at the moment is pretending that RFK Jr.'s unflinching loyalty and, quite frankly, his fear of saying anything negative about Israel. I pull up Dave Smith here.
The worst humanitarian catastrophe in the world
You can take
right
me out
now.
of this.
And the idea that you, who are supposed to be the anti-neocon, anti-war presidential candidate, are immediately on October 7th, before we even had an investigation, before we even knew what happened there, you immediately say, what basically you said everything they say about Ukraine. You said it was an unprovoked attack. Which, like, come on, give me a break. An attack from Gaza against Israel is unprovoked. And then you said, we have to support them in whatever it takes. Well, look, sir, we're watching it right now. This is whatever it takes.
And just to clarify, there's a lot of other evidence that Israel and Israel-aligned people are involved in having this blackmail, but I don't want to get into details just yet because that would kind of compromise some of the journalists that are currently a little at risk. Right now, Bobby's...
I don't understand that. So if you're talking about you don't want to compromise the story they're putting together, that's different. But so you're telling me that by releasing information that's relevant to people who might also be at risk because of this story in general, that the information you provide might give them some clearance or some understanding to have them avoid, but we're going to protect the journalist. That the journalist is at risk. So why wouldn't the information be presented to us? Why wouldn't everybody release the facts so we understand what's going on? To me, that seems almost suspicious. I'm not even saying towards him. I'm saying that's a strange thing to say for me. What journalists are out there putting themselves as the story? We're the ones being protected by the information. You guys have that backwards, okay? I'm not saying that journalists are required to put their lives at risk for information. I argue that is what our jobs are. But my point, though, is that to say that you, not him, but people out there, maybe saying to him that they won't do this because I feel like that means they've lost touch with what their position is. or they're dishonest.
His own staff around him they know this, and they have been trying to find the handler that's close to him, because it must be very close in order to be managing his tweets and managing his appearances and everything he's doing. And it sounds like there's a lot of people that are trying to protect him from this coming out, but it is already
right. So a cover up. So let's be clear. Even though he's being, if that's the case, the one blackmailed. So that's funny. Great. So it looks like Odyssey and Twitter or Instagram have both gone down. Not sure why. The point is that I just lost it. Damn it. When I said that.
Handler that's close to him, because it must be very close in order to be managing his tweets and managing.
Oh, yes. Right. So a cover up. Right. So the point being that he's clearly, yes, if this is the case, the one being blackmailed, but at the same time, there's things he did that they're trying to expose. Now, just having sexual relations with somebody is not a crime, but who knows if that's what it all, maybe it's more than that. I mean, let's be clear. That's what I think a lot of people are saying. If this is just simply some people, consenting adults doing something online, pretty sure that's, especially today, a pretty milquetoast claim. So he's a person. And yes, it's embarrassing, but that's not enough for people to do what we're seeing. It implies there's something far more compromising, that it's with somebody he shouldn't be, or something that's against the law. That's what Israeli blackmail, Epstein-style stuff was really about. Wildly compromising positions with disgusting proclivities. That's what it's all, everyone we've talked about. So this, I don't know. It feels like there's either a huge part of this missing, or this is all something to mislead people. I'm not talking about the entire part of RFK blackmail overlap. I just mean that the way this is being presented, the way it's being done, maybe using him, maybe not. I don't know.
His appearances and everything he's doing. And it sounds like there's a lot of people that are trying to protect him from this coming out, but it is already coming out. And unfortunately, it is out enough that journalists are in danger. And the point of this video is to let everyone know that the journalists are all in connection, and we are all talking, and we all know the story, and we have all shared it already, and we are all location sharing with each other.
So what are we talking about at this point? What's the story? That he is on video with some video sexting? Or is it this opaque part that you didn't mention that seems to be the entire story, if that's the case? I don't understand this, guys. Am I missing something? To me, this is a completely subjective sexting conversation about something we can't get shown, but they know because they were talking. This feels very off to me in a lot of ways. I'm not even remotely trying to suggest that means he knows that, or maybe I'm wrong. But what do you think? There's a little bit left. I just feel like this seems very, very, very manipulative. And even unless there's the part that he's not allowed to say because these journalists are in danger, whatever that means, unless that part is the whole story, all of this seems like a pretty small story in the context of what's going on. And if it's only about sexting on video, then it's just an embarrassing video. And it's not really even a big story, other than it's embarrassing for a politician to be doing what everyone does. You see what I'm saying? Like, unless I'm missing something, you tell me.
And we are looking out for each other. And so Emily Hagan is protected. And we are.
Yeah, somebody in the chat says, yes, all journalists are connected. Investigative journalists is pretty much like, it's weird, right? We're all connected. We're all talking. What do you mean we're all? It's a weird way to frame this. In a way, it's cementing in this idea that we are the media now, and this group of people that are almost predominantly misleading people. Misleading people. I said both at the same time. I mean, that's not my opinion. Look at the track record. And at the same time, take a look at our track record, or many others in this field, or the IMA in general. I shouldn't have to point that out. If you go back and look at the consistency of how often we've been incredibly right about stories well before it comes to pass, and then compare it to the ongoing we are the media now direction of every other day putting out fake information or things that never come to pass, or sources that claim things that aren't even real. And yeah, sometimes there's things that are accurate in there, usually about benign stories that don't really change the conversation. But I think it's obvious if you really stand back and look at the bigger picture.
Watching her, and we have her location shared, and she's already put her stuff out on the internet. But if anything were to happen to her, we are watching, and we will know who did it. There are other people too that have information about this stuff. And
we'll know who did it? I mean, what's the implication there? That what if anything happens to her, Israel killed her? Certainly something we should consider, but how would we know that? Like, I actually think that in a way, this is training people how not to be objective.
That are in positions that are a little scary right now. And to everyone out there in the bad team, we are also in touch with them. and we are also watching them and location sharing with them. Do not touch anyone.
Okay, that's really silly to me. Like almost cartoonish, but almost, I mean, what are we talking about? You're now directing the video to the deep state? Is that what's happening?
Affected. And we are watching her, and we have her location shared, and she's already put her stuff out on the internet. But if anything were to happen to her, we are watching.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's fair to say, right? Whatever. Who knows what's going on? If something happens to her, we're primed and paying attention.
And we will know who did it.
I don't know about that, but
there are other people too that have information about this stuff.
Other people have information
that are in positions that are a little scary, right?
That are in positions that are scary. What does that mean? So you're withholding important information that might keep other people safe, and you think that's something that that's putting the information out is what will keep you safe. That's my opinion, but how do we even know that's true? What does that even mean? The journalists are putting themselves as the story, apparently. You're the one that are supposed to be protecting the sources of information, not becoming the story yourself.
Now, and to everyone out there in the bad team.
To everyone in the bad team. What does that mean? The deep state, I guess.
We are also in touch with them, and we are also watching them and location sharing with them.
I guess the grouping of journalists that haven't released the information that are scared, and we're keeping a tab on them. Somebody help me frame that. So people that we don't even know, so maybe they don't exist, maybe they do, we don't have names, we don't know what they have, we don't know what information they add to the story, but they're scared and they're keeping tabs on them. We have their locations. So let's just say they all die all of a sudden. What does that mean to anybody else? We don't know who they are, what they had, what's going on. So that story will become this grouping of inner working people that were watching them knows they died, and here's the bigger story, but we can't prove. I mean, I just think this sounds a little bit silly at this point. Am I crazy? Now, let's just be clear that maybe the entire story is true. That's certainly possible. But I think it's a little bit odd. This is like a Twitter Files dry run for real breaking information.
Do not touch anyone. Decentralized media.
Yeah, but don't do it, though. Deep State, if you're listening, you don't do it because we're watching.
Media is doing its thing. And I wish that we didn't have to do it this way. And I do not know all the details yet. And I don't know if every single little detail that I just said is correct.
You got to love that disclaimer. Maybe put that in the beginning of the video next time.
But I know that enough of it is going on, and I'm getting it from at 5 to 6 different sources, 7 different sources tonight.
Can we know who those sources are? Well, you don't always get to know the sources, right? But unless you can verify something, it all becomes trust my sources, which is kind of typical for the mainstream alternative media. That doesn't mean false. But what we've seen so far is clear to suggest that he's, in some cases, willing to take what they claim without ever really being able to flesh these things out, like he just said at the end. So for all we know, this is him being played by a bunch of conservative hype spinsters, guys, or just nonpartisan spinsters that manipulate everybody in the partisanship, or the CIA, who literally dumps fake stories into people's laps just like this.
This is coming out, and the next months are going to be completely insane. To everyone who's going to be watching this unfold, think very critically, take your time, don't trust anyone, don't trust me, just take your time and watch it come out, and don't rush to judgments.
That's fair. I agree with that.
There is going to be media spin on media spin on media spin. There will be personal attacks, character assassinations. The entire playbook is about to come out. Jessica, the time to come clean is right now. You have an opportunity to tell the truth. And Bobby, I
mean, isn't it funny? So he ends with like absolute certainty, even though he made it clear that this isn't absolutely clear. Maybe not everything I reported is accurate, but you better come clean and we're all coming after you. I mean, okay, just to end, let's finish the last part.
Sorry that this is how this has to happen, but your opportunity to tell the truth is coming right up. And to everyone that's going to say, I told you so, you're right. You did tell us so.
Well, at least he said that. Right? Because a lot of us did say that this is an issue well before we got here. But I mean, look, I am very clearly suspicious about all of this. The way that this whole thing was laid out feels really off to me. But I'm not going to claim I know for sure because that's the extent of the information. It just feels like a big subjective, assumptive, here's a lot of what we think, but we can't show you everything, so trust the plan, and more may come out. When that thing comes out that we can't show, people will try to come after it. They'll try to tell you it's not true. And we're left here like, okay, so the story is I've got something we can't show you at the end of the day, because everything else we already pretty much knew, other than the implication that he's blackmailed through Israel because of all of it, that we don't get any evidence for. which, let's be clear, I also think is a likely possibility, but not even because of any of this. I just think this is very strange. Now, back to the CIA point very quickly. Don't forget this clip, okay? This is what they do. This goes back to the 70s.
Well, one of the four principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories.
But you do buy his confidence with true stories?
You buy his confidence and set him up. We've seen this happen recently with Jack Anderson, for example, who has his intelligence sources, and he has also admitted that he's been set up by them. You know, every fifth story just simply being false. You also work on their human vulnerabilities to recruit them in a classic sense, to make them your agent so that you can control what they do, so you don't have to set them up sort of, you know, by putting one over on them so you can.
Yeah, I think that's where we are. I think we're at a point where this is, and I'm not saying I know for sure him. I'm just saying I think that we're clearly seeing this happen again. Or really, the never actually stopped is the clear point. But I think it's important to recognize that that's part of this game. Now, I think it's also relevant to include this on that, you know, even with the timing of this, that especially with the CIA example. Here's Donald Trump on January 2nd, 2025, saying the CIA must get involved now. Well, it does not, they can propagandize through plenty of other groups. I just think it's relevant to include. But so there's his breakdown. As he said, RFK Jr. blackmail story is breaking. So what you just saw his entire breakdown. Now, if I do want to show you. Here's Candace Owens' video. You can watch the whole thing. It's about an hour long. But if you scroll through this and you can, you know, you have clips for the most part. You've got screenshots of the exchange. My point though is that this is her explaining the story, just at much more length, with a little more detail about the ins and outs of the actual back and forth, about the person doing a story on her. Okay, but the argument of him being blackmailed is that this person had a connection with him and it becomes this subjective story. I think that's, and this story has taken all the air out of the room. I find that really telling right now. So here's her full one if you want to watch it. It says, in this shocking twist of events, we learned that Olivia Nuzzi, RFK Jr.'s sexting companion, which we already knew, is orchestrating media hit pieces via, this is the one he pointed to, Jessica Reed Krause, saying, what do we have in common? I guess calling out Israel, but see, does that prove the case? Now, here's what's interesting. Here's the, just asking Brave, asking the general story. It says, Olivia Nuzzi, a New York Magazine reporter, has accused her ex-fiance, Ryan Lizza, of orchestrating a blackmail campaign against her. So Nuzzi's the one they're pointing to, remember? And it says that, so she's claiming that her ex-fiance is the one that did this to her, against her following, saying a orchestrated blackmail campaign against her following revelations about her personal relationship with RFK Jr. According to Newsy's court filings, which of course could be lies, Lizza allegedly began the harassment campaign at the end of July. So her ex-fiance harassing her, or basically forcing her to do this, attempting to blackmail her back into a relationship with RFK Jr. So that speaks to what Ian was pointing to. So at least the claim is that he got, I guess, caught them and then forced her to go back with him to blackmail something. Her, but it would make sense if he forced her, him maybe. But it says Newsy claims that Lizza stole a personal electronic device from her, hacked her devices, and anonymously sent personal information about her to the media. Now, does that sound like some random disgruntled ex-boyfriend, ex-fiance? You know, not everyone can just randomly hack devices and anonymous, right? Okay. So she also alleges that Lizza impersonated an anonymous campaign operative to give the political campaign information that would harm her further. Again, sounds like more like an intelligence apparatus operative than a random disgruntled ex-fiance, right? In response to these accusations, and this is all completely subjective, this is not something we can prove, just connecting more of these potential dots. In response to these accusations, Liza has denied the allegations, the ex-fiance, so she could lying potentially about what he did, stating that they are lies. He has also accused Newsy, the journalist they're pointing to, of using litigation with false and defamatory allegations as a public relations strategy. The accusations and denials have added another layer of controversy to this whole scandal, which we've already talked about. Now, this is what I found interesting, just as this overlap. Now, again, this is completely subjective. This guy, Ryan Liza, her ex-fiance, who she claims is blackmailing her, which is she's the one that they're claiming is involved with the potential blackmail story of RFK Jr., potentially. Liza, her ex-fiance, says sexual misconduct allegations. On 2017, New Yorker fired Liza. Excuse me. I keep reiterating it because it just sounds so close to Newsy. Liza, I guess, is just close. So the ex-fiance. It says in 2017, the New Yorker fired him, saying that he engaged in, quote, improper sexual conduct. Now, he called the New Yorker's characterization a terrible mistake that had been made hastily and without full investigation of the facts. His alleged victim supported the magazine's version of the event, so claiming she was abused by him. His alleged victim supported the magazine's events. In a statement, her attorney said, in no way did Mr. Liza's misconduct constitute a respectful relationship, as he now tries to characterize it. So that story ended where he got removed, and everyone was continuing to say that he abused her, or at least was inappropriate. Now, Liza was temporarily suspended by CNN pending the investigation, but 6 weeks later, the network announced that it had extensive investigation had yielded, quote, no reason to continue to keep him off the air. Politico, Rolling Stone, and other media organizations were later said to have reached the same conclusion. Even though the evidence didn't change, they just said, well, we investigated, doesn't seem to be a problem, he's back in. Okay. That's basically how it went down. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was all made up. My interesting thought is if we're trying to connect this, right, to some conversation of a blackmail network, whether you think it's Israel or not, what do we come to expect in this conversation? Let's just take Epstein, for example. Well, it's this kind of situation where somebody gets caught in something like this and they don't get rid of them. They patch it over, they keep them in their position, but they go, if you ever go against us, well, we're going to break this story. And not just the milquetoast he abused her, but the real story, where you got caught with, I could make a joke, right? They're just, the worst thing you could imagine. So to me, that's an interesting standout. So he got in his own situation, then they patched over it, or maybe it was a lie. And then we come later to the story to where he's the one, she's claiming blackmailed her into, not just blackmailed her, but blackmailed her into pushing a fake, or I guess the extension of a relationship that would be fake since it was already to an end to a degree with RFK Jr. So to me, that very much sounds like a blackmail network, like exactly what we know from Israel, Epstein, to where this person who potentially was already compromised was the one trying to compromise her to use that against RFK Jr., or who knows how that one plays out. Maybe it's a Democrat action to make RFK look bad. Anything's possible. But it does sound interesting. But I would say at this point, that's the extent of the evidence. And that's really, what I just simply showed is just a background data point. I would say, well, we don't know, right? That's where an honest, objective reporter would put this right now. That I don't think that's provable. Indie News just points out, not only did we know about Olivia Newsy's stuff last fall, which we did, and he posted all the links, we also knew he had a lot of skeletons, RFK Jr. We talked about it Indy talked about it in their article, documenting a bunch of red flags with RFK Jr. These screen caps were from this article, RFK Jr. Field of Red Flags, they call it. Here's the article they wrote. You can read it for yourself. The point is that I agree that there's a lot of information that was already out there that seems quite a bit more damning than just some sexting videos. That's why it seems as if the insinuation is that there's more we just can't show you because we're all in danger. Maybe. I really do find that strange, quite frankly. If you're, same point. Now, David Icke commented on this clip, and he says, but hold on. This guy celebrated the appointment of RFK Jr. when anyone with a brain cell knew he was owned by Israel. Now, again, that's a subjective claim. I agree with that, but I don't think we can argue we knew and that everyone knows. But I would argue it was that clear that there was something off and it was in the direction of Israel. I think everybody could see that. Everyone did say that, but to say it was owned, same point. RFK Jr. said long ago, the quote, the Palestinian people are arguably the most pampered people on international aid organizations, which was absolutely despicable, like just disgusting. And it's obviously not true. It hit quite a nerve to tell your audience that RFK Jr. is great and then tell them he's being blackmailed by Israel when it was obvious all along, this is the point, from his Zionist fanaticism that Israel had something on him. Now, again, whether you want to say on him or not, it's clear that he was blindly supporting Israel. Maybe that he's just a Zionist. Maybe he was being blackmailed. But I agree with Dave's point that it's a little bit disingenuous to say, because his point is, remember, Ian responded to us back then saying we were being blackpilled, or we were blackpilling, and and he even had the interview with Derek. Remember that. So he knew our points. But he did say you were right at the end of that video. But the problem is now to come back around and to act like it's some kind of a bomb. The point is there was all the evidence was there. But maybe Ian is finally seeing that. Who knows? He goes, I'm so sick of this constant contradictory BS. Now, a lot of people are calling that out. This kind of, breaking the news through the proper channels, whether he knows he's doing that or not, when it's something that we were all, the majority of the actual independent media was breaking this down with source material long before we got here. He responds. He says, there's a difference between having evidence and having correlation-based suspicion, David. Now, that's fair. He says, and you conveniently leave out all the good Maha could and still might hopefully do for our country. Well, I mean, that's not fair to say. It's not, that tweet wasn't about, everyone, you don't always include the counterbalance of the thing you're talking about in every tweet you put out there, right? But I don't know what David thinks about the potential positives, but that's not relevant to the conversation. And all the good they've done, I made that point a second ago. I don't think we can even remotely say that they've done all this good right now. There's a lot of things up in the air, and there's far too much obvious that they have failed you on already. The mRNA shots are still going. They did not pull back the COVID shot like Jones lies about. They're currently promoting the 2025 shot for people over 12 and still more boosters for people over 6 months. And it's all still happening. And they're rolling out an mRNA cancer shot that alone destroys the entire point. So let's even say they did pull back the COVID shot. Well, too late. They've already got an mRNA platform built into his administration. So it's just frustrating that we can't see that and be clear about that. Maybe good will happen, and I'll side with you on that. But right now, it's nothing. It's a lot of hype and a lot of small moves that may amount to more good. But it says, for being so wise, you certainly do use the deep state tactic of oversimplifying and character hack divisiveness an awful lot. And I think it's clear that a lot of people do today, including you, Ian, I think in a lot of points. It says, and it's abundantly clear you're not particularly familiar with my body of work while you do it. I wouldn't agree with that. It says, at this point, what are you contributing? Not in the past, today. What are you contributing today? Well, I think that's a dangerous way to go, seeing as how David Icke and his iconic network are contributing far, 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 far more than most people in this conversation. But it says, we are clearly on the same team. And which maybe that's the truth, but that feels a lot like what Alex Jones was doing when he was talking with David Icke last time. Like, we're friends and we're the same. And he's like, no, we're not. No, we're not. It's pretty embarrassing. It says, watch my content and you would probably realize that, yet all you seem to know how to do is ride my coattails and half-baked attacks. So he struck a nerve, clearly. Here's what Derek said. I think he is right to bring this point up, Ian. I mean, in our discussions on Monday, we both acknowledged that RFK Jr. was likely being blackmailed based on his history, not only the 2024 accusations by Newsy and his admitted history of womanizing, but also other allegations and the odd circumstances surrounding his ex-wife's suicide and burial. There's a lot that could be something they're using against him. We brought that up years ago, or rather, let's say, the reason I say it like that is this conversation's been had before he was running for president. The point is, let's just make it post joining the administration. We've all been talking about that. There are older allegations against RFK Jr. going back to his to the 2000s. They are hard to find, but they're there. That's what Derek adds. So, you can see that this is a little bit touchy, right? I mean, David clearly has identified in his mind this person as an absolute manipulator. I think it's very fair to consider that. But I do think it's interesting to see how this is playing out. Now, here's a clip that Derek put out that I want to play. And this David Icke said, bros is excellent here. Trump is a deep state gopher tasked with bringing MAGA on board with what they would oppose if a Democrat was in power. Now, same as always, the point is you guys can decide for yourself. If you think that is the case, that's clearly what he thinks. I think at this point, the evidence is pretty monumentally obvious that these people are compromised by something. That's what I would agree with. It's unreal how many examples we've seen of the exact opposite of what they said wouldn't happen, or rather what they claim would never happen, rolling out right out of the gate. How that's not enough. I mean, even Ian pointed these things out. But it says, and they would oppose it if a Democrat was in power, obviously. The takeover of society by AI human fusion and AI-controlled dystopia. Look at the alternative voices that get the big numbers supported by the big tech algorithms and ask why that is when those awake to the scam like bros do not. Exactly the fair point to make. And it's not to say that, I mean, never is it to assume that the person who is knowingly doing so. Certainly worth considering, right? But I think that's the biggest problem today is people that don't know they're being used. Derek, on the other hand, has amazing work, in my opinion. You guys can decide for yourself, but it's all very well sourced. Same with us, same with a lot of us. And very few actually get to the, really, I mean, even David himself, he's a central, monumental figure in independent media, and he gets sidelined all the time by this stuff. That's crazy. He's got more followers in the world than most people, and yet he doesn't even get the reach on his point. It doesn't make any sense unless you recognize that there is active suppression, which I shouldn't have to convince you of that. That's provable today. But here's a good clip of them talking. I recommend you watch the full thing, which is clipped below or linked below, because it's a good back and forth. And Derek, he's doing, this is why I respect Derek so much, more than pretty much anybody, is that he is going at this with honesty. He's not going at this debate and he's getting a lot, I think he's getting more hatred from people simply for talking to him, which is the same stupid point of assuming one way or the other. Obviously, everybody, Derek is trying to come to the facts, trying to suss out whether there's more there or not, whether he knows it or not, or just trying to find common ground. Anybody that's going to demonize that, I think, is part of the problem. You can watch for yourself and see that he's very clearly just trying to find the truth in everything that's being discussed. That matters to me.
I do feel very good still about my vote for Trump in the sense that had we and I'd be really curious for your take on this specifically. Up until Trump's election, I feel quite confident that all of the presidents in my lifetime were directly acting on behalf of this shadow government, that most of them were even groomed throughout their entire political career for this shadow government and enacted direct shadow government policies throughout their entire career, up to Biden being literally not even there, like maybe even dead. We don't know. Or at least I don't know. And so Trump, I still am of the belief that Trump does not, in my mind, seem to be acting directly on behalf of the shadow government, but rather seems to be acting as a businessman that grew up around the shadow government, that is easily swayed by wealth and money, easily swayed by deal making, easily swayed by.
So completely personal opinion, which is fine. You can have your own opinion, but all the evidence clearly suggests that the same agendas have continued. That's the one thing I've been trying to show people. All the narrative is one thing, but if you stand back and look at the many, many different agendas, or rather the many administrations that have continued the same central agendas, those things are still happening. The same AI direction, the same technocracy, the same bias, every part of it, everything we've discussed. I could rattle it all off. The main things have not only continued, they've gone crazy. So you could argue he doesn't know that. That's fair to say he's being used the same way I'm talking about. That's something I've often considered. But it's based on the idea that you just choose to view it a different way. That's all it really comes down to. That's giving them the benefit of the doubt. And that is a blind spot. I see it everywhere. We all do it sometimes. It's not unique to anybody in particular, but I think it's interesting that how much we've already seen. And this seems like the same kind of two-step that we saw before the selection process.
By big words and sexy big numbers like Larry Ellison with his big talk of fucking AI bullshit. Which often makes it so that Trump is acting on behalf of them, but I don't see him as aligning directly with him. And a lot of the actions he's taken, like dismantling USAID, like going after.
See, that's the talking point. That's not what happened. Even dismantling is not accurate, or the idea of the general point about how he's not completely leaning into every single thing that he is their man, guys. It's obvious. The agenda is exactly what they wanted to accomplish. You can look at what they were claiming before he came into power.
Like DOGE and just dismantling all these sort of integrated parts of our government that are objectively tools for this deep state or shadow government.
But what exactly has been dismantled? We've got a lot of talk and a lot of statements and a lot of narratives and web pages. This is the problem. If we're in a situation where the narrative of how you're fighting the deep state is being fed to you through data points coming from a part of the government. Now, sure, that government utilizing the infrastructure that we call the deep state is somehow fighting that same infrastructure. It's certainly possible, I guess. but it seems a little bit naive to be taking the information from the government about how the government's fighting the government. That's just me, though.
He's doing a lot of things that do not benefit the shadow government just on face value.
Like what? Like what? I would love to see an example of something that truly translates out past narrative that is actually fighting the real agenda of the power structure. Jim in the chat, if you got a thought.
But then he's also being manipulated into doing other things, or he's willingly doing other things that are on their behalf. And so what I'm saying is that I'm still...
I mean, couldn't you just reframe it the other way? Couldn't you just turn around and say that they're getting him to do things that make it look like he's not on our side, but he is because he's doing all these other things? Subjective. You can see it how you want to. That's why we have to question everything. And the main point is, with all the evidence we do have that aligns with their agenda, should be enough to make you go, he might be. And that's all we're saying. He might be. And so consider that as we go forward, as opposed to giving the benefit of the doubt because he probably isn't, which is the way they want to see it.
Rather be in the media environment post-Trump as opposed to a Kamala media environment. Because I can't even imagine where we would be if Kamala was our president right
in the exact same position
now. But I'd be really curious for your take on that whole perspective, because I think we disagree on this, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I think it's totally bullshit, man. Like not against you, just I can't buy that. I think it's respectfully, I think it's naive to think that with all of Trump's connections that he's not. I think, well, for one, you're correct that he's driven by ego. I think that's true, and that's a great way to manipulate a person. A person who is driven by ego, as much as people want to give Trump credit for like he's the Teflon Don who doesn't bow down to anybody and everybody bows down to him. And sure, I'll give him credit in certain areas of posturing that way. But we sure do see him bow down to Israel. I think it's debatable who's in charge, whether it's Elon or him. Obviously, the Adelsons. I want to talk about Peter Thiel in a little bit and DOGE.
Yeah,
so I'm going to hold my thoughts on that in just for a couple minutes. But in general, that perspective, I do have an immense difficulty trying to believe that. Now, that doesn't mean that that we're not in some like new territory and haven't been with Trump. I believe, like, without being able to prove all the pieces, but I've been saying this since he first popped on the scene in 2016, that Trump is the New World Order, deep state, shadow government's literal Trump card. I don't think that is like, a mistake, that phrase even exists. I think that he is here for this reason, to serve this purpose, to sort of, astroturf or collect the real freedom, truth, conservative, libertarian-ish movement and bring a bunch of people in there, because despite you having a more nuanced take even though I do disagree with what you just said, your take is still more nuanced than the Trump supporters who everything that we just talked about prior to this, you're willing to say, yeah, that doesn't look that good. They're going to just keep saying, well, no, who cares? There are absolutely cultish Trump members. I know that you see them out there as well. And I think it's worth, just pointing that out, that they're definitely, and I think in a very dangerous way, not to say that the other side doesn't have their own cults. Obama was probably the biggest left-wing Democrat cult we saw. I don't think Biden really had that same kind of thing. It was more of like a motivation by hatred of Trump.
Plug your ears and pretend it's not this bad.
Yeah, just like, okay, well, it's at least it's not Trump, but that's kind of the whole thing. I even see in the comments here just saying like, imagine if Kamala had won. And I think it's just such a low level of thinking, not to say that this is the position you're taking, but when somebody criticizes Trump and the only response somebody has is, it isn't like to say, well, let's debate this point about Israel or about Maha or about the vaccines or about what have you. It's just to say, at least it's not Kamala. Like, and that I think was by design. This is how this system, how the pyramid of power operates, that they create kind of enemies to set up only to knock them down, So for the last couple of years, it's been like, and there has been some truth that the left is going hardcore into transgenderism and open borders and DEI and all this stuff. And so you build that up, and then all Trump has to do is come in and kind of be the opposite of it. Great. Okay. He did some executive orders about transgender sports and, men and women's sports. And I know a lot of people celebrated it. I think that's a common sense thing. But that also is very easy. It doesn't really require much political capital to do that, in the same way that freeing Ross Ulbricht, which is something I celebrate and have fought for since the day Ross was locked up. I'm grateful that happened. I'm so grateful every time I see Ross posting on Twitter, like at the Grand Canyon and at the beach and stuff like that. Trump had a role in that. But I also think, again, it's not a move that cost him a lot of effort or time or money or anything like that. But then I look at things like, just one example, giving the Panama Canal or helping, supporting Panama Canal being taken by Larry Fink and BlackRock. And I see the Trump supporters, well, it's better that we have it, not China. And that's kind of a whole other side conversation about collectivism and people identifying with the country or the politicians like, we did that. Well, I didn't bomb anybody. I'm not going to necessarily benefit if the US government allows BlackRock to bring in, take control of a couple ports in the Panama Canal. But people really identify with Trump, so they deflect any negative criticisms, and then something they see as positive, they sort of talk about it, or maybe even believe that they're benefiting in some way, even if it's not necessarily inherently true. So I just think that the control grid has set up these clear false binaries, and Trump represents something new, like where you've got a lot of the movement. I mean, I know you've been on InfoWars a lot recently. I shared today on my Twitter a clip from myself on InfoWars back in 2012. I was on there in 2011, 2012, 2013, right around the time I started talking about Trump and being critical of him. The InfoWars invites stopped coming. And as you know, a lot of people have left InfoWars over the years because of things that they saw with Alex, David Knight, Aaron and Melissa Dykes, Kurt Nimmo, so many others who I think are principal people who just kind of got sick of what they were seeing as like a blind spot in the InfoWars crew. To me, that's emblematic of not only a section of independent media, I'll call it mainstream alternative media as Ike calls it, but also just some of the audience that no matter what, they're just going to stand by their man. They're going to stand by him. And I think that's really dangerous.
Well said by Derek. I agree. Now you guys can watch the full back and forth if you'd like, the clips beneath that. I mean, I don't know how, the point is that Derek's not pretending we know for sure. But the reality is, like I said, there's more than enough evidence to have a lot of concern, a lot of questions. The problem is that far too many people, even leaning in that same direction, are choosing to blind themselves to what they get is the outcome. And that's dangerous. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of overlapping kind of views on this just to get different takes from people that are going to, kind of give you the different sides of the people, how they're seeing this kind of play out on the internet. So this person's a Midwestern doctor, said, Ian Carroll's allegation RFK is being sexually blackmailed just started trending. So did you know he recently promoted an absurd and fake story about Tim Walz molesting kids? Now, you can go through this yourself. I mean, you get a lot of this in the partisan field where it's kind of like, this might be happening. Here's what we're hearing. And then it becomes fact in the partisan field. That's not his responsibility to, how other people frame the story, but you see how this works a lot in this kind of ecosystem. RFK's sex scandal was known at the time of his Senate hearing, but was not brought up because it was completely absurd, it says. You can decide about that. But the pharmaceutical industry and their lackeys were desperate to stop RFK Jr. and dredged up every possible allegation they could to stop his nomination, but they still didn't touch that because there was nothing there. Now, that doesn't sound accurate to me. To me, that if they were going after everything, they would have thrown that too. To me, that seems like this was set up this way. Maybe held back for the reasons that actually add to the possible blackmail story. But it says, when the Waltz thing happened, many major influencers realized it had been a hoax designed to discredit the Trump campaign right before the election as peddlers of misinformation. So Ian Carroll's story was never amplified and called out by large accounts like this one's clandestine. So interesting, right? That just didn't get leaned into by the ecosystem that allows these things to go viral. And so it didn't happen. I think we know that it's how this works. It says, I listened to Ian Carroll's allegations this time and around and noticed they had the same pattern. Rather than present any substantial allegations, a variety of salacious things were said to create the implication of something bad. Point being that it's very easy to get clicks and trend by making absurd or salacious allegations, but it's not a good long-term strategy as it destroys the trust in the alternative media. That's long since gone. That's why it's the mainstream alternative media. And it needs to compete with the mass media. Stuff like this happens all the time. So normally, you get the sense of what they're saying. And this is Toby Rogers saying, I like Ian Carroll, but this endless click farming is annoying. Just give you the feeling of certain people online, whatever I think about it, just to show you what people are saying. Here is Revolutionary Blackout. And this is just, I'm actually going to play you one clip from Candace, more so about the woke right, which I find interesting. But this is the longer 9-minute clip that pretty much encapsulates some of the larger points from her video. But this is Revolutionary Blackout just saying, this RFK Jr. blackmail story is pure cope. RFK Jr. was a hardcore Zionist for years, and you idiots still supported him. Now they're trying to save face, claiming RFK Jr. is only advocating cracking down on free speech for Israel because he's blackmailed. Just admit you were tricked by another Zionist con man. That's interesting, right? So you can see how both could make that argument. One argument is that this are people trying to manipulate the Trump position, make them look bad. But this is an interesting thing to think about. I mean, look, I agree in a large sense that okay, let's put it this way. Unless there's more that they haven't shown us, which seems to be this kind of ongoing indication, this subtle kind of more to come, they're at risk. As far as anybody honest should take that, It doesn't matter. It's meaningless until we see something we can verify. It's all just narrative, okay? Sort of like the other story that was not happening before that. But my point is, if this is based on nothing but subjective, hypothetical, maybe, well, we already had enough of that. There's an endless amount of that and far more provable stuff before the selection process. This is what he's saying, that we knew this guy was. So then if that's all it took, this does seem like a little bit of this is the only reason he's now lying for Israel. We weren't tricked. Israel's got him. And that's the point, is that everybody already knows that that's an easy sell, because Israel is showing itself to be one, let's put it this way, Zionism is showing itself to be one of the most disgusting, dishonest, dangerous, manipulative, surreptitious entities on the planet. Now, I'm not one to make that is what you can see them doing. That's what you can see them proudly having conferences about. Literally telling, I mean, I've gone over it so many times, it makes me sick to know people like that exist in the world that are saying, I want, Batar US, for example, when shown all the children, they say, not enough, we demand more blood. That's what they said to the list of children under 1 year old that were killed in Gaza. They knew what they were saying. That's why they deleted the tweet. The point is, it is clear what we're dealing with. And that's not all Israelis or all Jews. Let's be clear about that. The point is that is there. And Zionism is a huge issue. So this is about trying to make it the one thing they all know people won't balk at, if that's what you think is the case. And it's a fair argument to make. Again, because it seems to be nothing's really proven at this point. Ken O'Keefe, I'll play this clip for you, says she's right. Woke right want you to die for the state of Israel and their wars and censor you, Netanyahu types. Woke left wants you to die on the altar of self-mutilation, open borders, and censors you, Soros types. It's the same people who play both sides, and we do their bidding. Now, you can argue he's talking about Jewish people. Maybe he is. I disagree with that as the framing. I think it's obviously Zionism. Maybe I'm wrong. The bottom line is that is the way to be seeing the picture. That you have string pullers on both sides of this that get you into the position that the power structure wants you in. I don't even think that needs to be convinced. That is what the evidence shows. But that aside, I just want you to hear what Candace Owens is saying about the largely the Republican. I mean, this is what's funny. I've got a lot of pushback lately from highlighting what I think, that gets framed as sort of petty discussions. And maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong. But I've been talking about some of these people, Jones included, because I've really started to identify more than just what I've always said, but something more nefarious than usual happening right now. Like turned into overdrive, right? They've literally kicked up the, whatever the analogy is, they've put it into high gear to where they're trying to manipulate you for something. I can't stop seeing that. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's why I've started to make more effort to kind of highlight how this is going. And yet I've gotten a lot of pushback. Again, maybe rightly so because of doing so. But I want you to see that there's a lot of people, even in the right, even people like Candace Owens, that have clearly identified the same exact problem. And I would like to think that adds more credence, especially coming from within their party and saying these manipulators in the woke right are constantly deceiving you. Listen up, guys, because they really are. It's also on the left, by the way. It is simply partisanship. It's how our government operates.
You are all frauds, and you're going to get exposed. I'm telling you, one by one, you're going to get exposed because you're pissing me off now, okay? I spent all of 2024 having to fight you guys. You're like disgusting little goblins. You operate all in the dark. You lie. It's you lie like some people breathe, genuinely. These people lie like I breathe. It's just natural. It's just like their lungs expand and a lie comes out. And there's a network of them, and Meghan McCain and Ben Dominic have been a part of that network forever, okay? Everyone knows who these neocons are, who want to keep Americans drummed up, go to war. These people who can't fight the wars, they cry when someone points out accurately that they're clinically obese. They can't fight the wars, but your sons and daughters better fight the wars, guys. God forbid you have a person on a platform telling you, no, this is stupid. We don't need to be involved in Bibi Netanyahu's Middle East BS and expansion policies.
Right. Okay.
They don't have the people, so they want you to be the people that go die for it and are trying to marry you to those ideas.
Now, just to be clear, there's plenty of things about her opinions that I might disagree with. I guarantee there's people out there that are already going, well, she thinks this and that, and so therefore, well, maybe she's wrong about those things. Maybe you're wrong about those things. This point, regardless of all the other things, is important to recognize. It's almost one of the things that has, most people that I talk to, whatever position they're in politically, are aware to some degree that the U.S. government is fighting wars for Israel. Or again, to be very clear, for Zionism. Israel is just the central point for Zionism today. Or really, maybe that's shifting into the United States. I genuinely think that. My point, though, is that this is something we can't dismiss. The evidence is overwhelming. That's why Jeffrey Sachs has been getting a lot of traction by simply laying out the evidence. The books that Netanyahu literally wrote, the many times he's literally stood up in Congress and said, do this, then they do it. And that's exactly what continues to happen. And Trump is doing more so than that, more in that direction than I've ever seen a president do. And did so last time with Trump Heights and Jerusalem. And I mean, guys, it's impossible to miss. So whatever else you think you disagree with, the point is it's interesting to see that there is some alignment, whether opportunism or not, across the board on this point. That's why I think it's so telling that Jones is out there trying to gaslight you away. You're obsessed with Israel. Guys, this is a point in history where I think I've never seen this percentage, like the majority of people in a divided country who are clear about at least one of the problems. And that's why you should stand out more. It should stand out more than ever, those that are trying to direct you in any way they can away from the glaring, gigantic siren red flag situation that we all see.
In the classroom, on podcasts, via the media, and because their relationship and your trust in media has been fractured, they now have to work on trying to fracture your trust in people like me and Tucker Carlson. This is the new vibe.
You know my thoughts about Tucker, and some often in this case too. I mean, let's be clear. She seemed to give Andrew Tate I mean, calling it a softball interview would be insulting to softball interviews. Okay, same with Tucker. I've got plenty of doubts. That doesn't change, like I just said, the facts of what we're discussing now. That's why it's always important to err on integrity and outcome. That ultimately makes the person largely irrelevant, guys. It's about what you can prove. You look at the source material. If there's none, you move on. Or, you make a note and you move on in case something else comes up. So that's my point. I think Tucker Carlson's a manipulator. I really do. I think that's pretty obvious, but that doesn't change the fact that they're, at least in some, I think it's opportunism from that side to bring this over. But frankly, she has been doing I don't even know how you could conclude Tucker Carlson in this conversation. He has occasionally pointed to some very soft parts of that conversation. Candace Owens, for whatever reason, maybe because she really cares about it, has been knocking these things out of the park around Israel for a while now. So maybe it's about just kind of clout. I don't know. I just want to point that out because I do not think that's an accurate way to frame that.
New vibe. Carlson. This is the new vibe. He sounds like an Iranian propagandist when he says don't die in Iran.
Yeah, you know what that is? That's a classic U.S. government talking point. You're an Assad apologist. You're a Saddam apologist. Guys, this is not new. It's just new for the people that woke up in 2020 and politics started for them at that time. The reality is, if you look back through this, same thing with terrorism and efficiency movements and what they're doing today, they repeat, guys. The same thing cycle. They give the same speeches over. They give the same. That's what they do because they know what works. So if you look, they've been doing that for you forever, acting like you saying X, Y, and Z makes you some kind of a pro-Iranian desk. That's what they're doing to me right now. You must be a Hamas support. You mean the Hamas that Israel funds? If you consistently stand on actual fact and logic, these people run. I mean, you see in the conversations online where when they recognize that you're not trapped in the two-party illusion, most of them cut and run because it's hard to argue with the actual objective logic.
When he says that obviously no person should send their kids to die in the Middle East because this has been our policy, our flatline policy for the last decades, and nothing good has come of it. Literally nothing good has come of it. They can't even pretend anything good has come of it. Look around, look at your streets, look at your country. Is your country cleaner? Is your country better for having fought Israel's wars for decades?
See?
Oh, that's anti-Semitic.
There's reason that this is why more than in this conversation, she strikes me as genuine. But don't just make it about the facts. The reason I say that is because it's an important point, right? To make the larger overlap. What did she say right here?
Oh, that fought Israel's wars for streets. Look at your country.
Yeah, so you get a lot of the back and forth of like the political conversation, right? Where Democrats have the dirty cities and Republicans are all great. And there's some level of truth to that in some context, but that's just one of the points. The problem is that when you look at the full picture, the reality is there's differences where you look at the end of the day, what have we actually gained in any way, in any material way, in anybody's lives based on what this government has blindly been doing for Israel for 76 years? It's a good question. And if you actually listen or you look and it's nothing. I mean, it is blind, one-sided, always giving at the expense of Americans, now to the point to where Americans are literally feeling the removal. I mean, as we talked about, the removal of your rights, or rather the lack of acknowledgement of your inherent rights for a foreign government. It's now coming to pass like we've been worried about for quite a long time. Now, just in a general point, Jose says, hey guys, I think RFK may be getting blackmailed by Israel. You never would have guessed. I mean, it's just this weird, that's why I used that picture today. That was the moment that really stood out to me. The picture for the show today, because that's when RFK Jr. was on stage as the presidential candidate for the United States of America, and Shmuley stood up and fielded questions in his stead. Didn't ask him, didn't look to him, jumped up and answered for him when it was a question that he was offended by. Can you imagine the hubris of somebody like that to think you can stand up and jump in front of a leading presidential candidate's response? That shows you something very clear. He had the upper hand in that relationship, or something quite a bit worse. Now, that's the objective way to look at it. It could mean nothing. It could mean that Shmuley just is a pompous person that felt he could do that because of their relationship. But I think it's obvious that once we saw this weird overlap and the many times that Shmuley was acting as his handler in conversations, that something shifted. We all felt it. Very weird. But that doesn't prove, right? But here is the other clip. I'll play two clips, actually. The one from that everyone talks about, which is we've shown many times, which is important because I don't know how you miss what this clear gap shows you, but also the clip of him admitting to being on Epstein's planes. None of that proves everything, but it is an important data point that suggests that there's points of compromise.
I don't agree with that, but okay. Do you have concerns about the level of Israeli influence in our politics here in the United States of America?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm not, I'm not a politician in political office, so I don't see much of that.
Sounds a lot like Peter Thiel. I'll defer to Israel because I don't know. Very telling. Also, about a 6-second gap between him answering that question. Pretty sure he seems pretty confident about it now, doesn't it? It's exactly whatever they want. And here's the other one.
Never on Jeffrey Epstein's jet, were you?
I was on Jeffrey Epstein's jet 2 times.
No, yeah. So was Trump more than once. Doesn't mean we prove something problematic, but it certainly does suggest a possibility, especially with what we see today. True blue-pedaled rebel says the blackmail of RFK from Israel is about to become mainstream news. We are the precipice of understanding. See, this is my problem. The framing of this is that's how Ian was framing it. Everyone seems to be framing this however they want to, and nobody has any evidence, guys. Thank you, Twitter files. Welcome to We Are the Media now. It's not everybody. Frankly, I don't even know if it's the majority. It's this weird bubble that everyone's in, the lens that everyone looks through, because that's the only, it's like, this is the new mainstream media. Twitter is the representation of the new media apparatus today. Where else do you get I've said this for so long, before even Twitter or anything else. Where did you ever get the representation of what they claimed the majority was? Or any representation of a majority picture? You know, some random account, even if they have 1 million followers, does not give you that presentation. So the only way, and I argue it's always dishonest, is the corporate media, the government. That's the largest apparatus, and they can present to you their polls and their media presentations of the left and the right battling each other. So reality is we don't ever really know, and we never really will, other than some real-time thing they're trying to drive us into, which nobody should want. My point is, I think we a long time ago surpassed that in a lot of ways, and we don't know it, like we saw with COVID-19. So the problem is that we're at a point now where people are kind of lumping, like they've taken that away and moved it into a field where they're pretending it's now it's all independent. We've broken, we've fought, we beat the deep state, we won already, right? And so now basically people have been tricked into the new version, and they're clearly falling for it. I don't know if it's the majority. I'd like to believe we're smarter than that. We don't have the evidence almost every time these stories come out, but they get subjectively reported. Let's not forget, like the CIA point, even Mint Press News in 2022 revealed that former Israeli spies were working at top jobs in media and both social and corporate, as has been covered many times. Facebook, Microsoft, Google, Twitter, ADL overlap with that as well. We'll go into that more in a second. This has an effect. And some of the newer people to this, as even Ian again, for example, has made clear himself that he's new to this, to the point to where he might not be as on guard to the things that we all see regularly. But here's what we got before, right? So this is January 22nd. Alex Jones says, world exclusive inventor of mRNA tech, Dr. Malone, raises alarm over AI-driven mRNA cancer vaccines in his Stargate program, even though he's basically just dropped that after feigning concern about it and now it's all rolling out. My point is that, gee, it's almost like many of us tried to warn you about exactly this. And instead of caring, you called us black-pilled and made 10 posts about how Elon Musk was saving free speech while he was censoring for Zionism. So the point is for twofold, to show you the free speech thing happening again. And I think that's kind of the go-to, but also that that's what happened before and it seemed to have happened again. And even Ian's calling it out. The fact that we were all saying that. And this is not about hypothetical stuff, guys. It's about how often you can read the room based on past examples and what they've been doing so far. That's not even a guess. That's at worst, that's an educated guess. And that's why I point to our track record if you look for yourself. If you want reliable information that's consistently ahead of the game, I look for TLAV and the rest of people, just to say the Independent Media Alliance in general. But so that's related to now, because we're doing the same thing now, where we're being forced into a situation where we're acting like now we're responding to the narrative instead of how we already saw that this is where we would end up. That's what David was saying. But so yet again, the response is to, in a lot of ways, lurch back into Elon saved us. I just find it interesting how often that's the moment, right? So same day, today, he just randomly tweets out yesterday, I guess. That's when it really, yesterday into today was the main part of the story. Elon Musk buying Twitter was one of the most significant and important days in world history. God, it's just cringy. Free speech is alive and well here on X. For no reason, just decided to scream that out the Twitterverse. I'm sure you probably know why. I said, just meeting your quota, cat turd. Talk about cringe post. Yikes. Sure it is. Like, as in free speech alive and well. You know, in between the blatant censorship and personal temper tantrums of Elon Musk and the outright suppression of content by the ADL that both Elon and Yaccarino have proudly admitted to, but sure, free speech. I mean, this is what's so frustrating for people that are just even remotely objective. Again, you can argue that he's done all the things, but to say he's saved free speech or that this was the most monumental thing in the history of the planet is so dumb. It makes me pain. It hurts me. Like, it's even a waste of time. But people are being led into this. I'd like to believe people aren't. Well, exactly. So funny. And this one says, it's so funny how they all circle around. I agree. He saved free speech and possibly the election. It's just kind of sad. But interesting timing. And this person points out, hey, look, this is the free speech on this platform. And here's what he said. He says, the last time I checked, we babysit you. And he says, I'll just say retards is the word he uses, with everything. So we babysit you retards with everything, he says. That's why we want it stopped. He says, F y'all and your endless wars. Islam and Muzzies are not my enemy. You won't gaslight me into believing so either. So basically saying that Muslim people are not his enemy. Okay. What's interesting about that is there's plenty of woke censorship that you might apply, but we're not in that time anymore, right? I thought we weren't censoring based on insulting words unless it has to do with Israel, though, right? Okay. They censored it. And he says, why? You promote and amplify, which he does. I think we even talked about this, an account called Retard Finder. Now you can't call someone a retard, which is the claim they're using. So it's selective application, guys. Really what he's doing is calling out what he sees as their agenda. Right? That you're not going to convince me to hate Muslim people. So whatever algorithmic decision goes, well, you can't say that word. And even though Elon does, and he supports the account, as always, the same point is it is subjective, which I shouldn't need to prove this to anybody. We've seen Republicans call this out at least twice around the H-1B visa conversation. And what was the other one? I believe it was the election one. I forget, where he just kind of freaked out and censored people on his own platform. People that were commenting underneath him. Even Loomer got censored for a moment until she pled to them and let her back on, and she's the worst people in the world. But this person, same thing, where it says, a Catholic chameleon and a Jewish pervert doing the bidding of the Zionazi regime, or state, he says. Okay, you may be offended by that. He doesn't say, well, here's the point. If you were to come on this platform and say a Catholic chameleon and a Christian pervert doing the bidding of a Christo-Nazi state, would that be censored? You damn well know that it would not be censored. So if you're not applying it logically, then you're censoring people based on ideology, which we damn well know that they are. Even if you think it's insulting. The point is, if you don't protect the worst of speech, you don't believe in free speech. But this one I just thought was interesting, and the point of this overlap. And technically, this is about this could have applied to the part we might get to about Teslas, but this is just about the partisan blindness or people like this. So on the 24th of March, Cat Turd, just daily reminder, wear your MAGA hat proudly, drive your Tesla proudly. Oh, look at this. Go back to 2022. Here's the different take. Just so you know, Cat Turd says, everything about electric cars suck, and they're horrible for the environment. It's not the way of the future and never will be. It's a bad joke pushed by idiots and elitist morons. Oh, well, back to today. Drive your Tesla proudly, because I was told to. And that's my marching order. Now, sure, you could change your opinion, but that means that you have kind of hard to listen to somebody who can go from saying everything about them suck, they're bad for the environment, it'll never be the way of the future, only pushed by bad idiots and elitists, and then they're great and support them proudly. Well, it's an electric car. It's the same thing. But I guess you're swayed by the ideology around it. Then, yep, that completely answers my question. These are the million follower accounts that are leading people into this Pied Piper problem. But so right now, as we're talking about the Israel influence that is shockingly obvious, and now it's even coming out through other stories, whether you believe the framing or not, the reality of Israel blackmail through Epstein is a undeniable part of the story. CIA and Mossad were involved. That was according to the intelligence from our government. So the reality is the question is to what degree does it affect the people in the current administration? That's a very fair question. But meanwhile, same thing with the partisan field. You're getting people like Laura Loomer that keep doing this, by the way. I just showed you the same thing about a week ago where she just jumps into the conversation right as this is all coming out and says the Chinese infiltration gets even worse. Which I would never deny the possibility of any government trying to influence or infiltrate another government, especially not, when it's the U.S. government or Israel. But the point is that it should not be ignored. But is there evidence to show that? Especially if you're going to compare it to the overwhelming, ongoing waterfall of evidence that shows you what Israel's doing right now. But of course, as a proud Zionist, her own words, she'll never acknowledge that. And she says, it's a painful lesson in why vetting is so important. Of course, she's going to go after somebody in the government, probably because of their support of Palestine. But it says, I will be publishing the rest of my findings soon. Now, let's just even say she outright proves that somebody's getting funded by China. That should matter, right? That matters if a foreign government is funding our politicians, right, Laura? But you obviously know where I'm going with this. It's insane to think that she's going to ever call out the overwhelmingly provable amount of, I'm not even talking about AIPAC. That's obvious too. That's why that's the JFK conversation of trying to make it register as a foreign agent before he was killed, and it didn't happen. The bottom line is that it is one of the clearest things in this conversation, even being called out by MSNBC, that Israel, through AIPAC and everything else, is straight up funding our elections. Miriam Adelson, you can go on forever, but you will never find somebody like this, there's a few of them, ever calling that out. Have to ask yourself why. You can decide for yourself. That's why I said, hey, look over there. That's what she's doing, in my opinion. Well, here's Nick Sorter doing a similar thing, I think. So Massey comes out with a bill requiring that those running for federal office are required to disclose all countries in which they hold citizenship. Obviously, that matters no matter where you're from, which has been my point the whole time. I don't care as the ones like Loomer try to make us out to be racist against Jewish people. The point is, we're not talking about any religion here. That's the Zionist shtick. This is about other citizenship. So in this case, it'd be about Israeli or Chinese or British, right? That's what we're talking about. And any one of those things are problematic because it presents a possible conflict of interest. It's basic logic. So he goes on to say, we should even go further and ban dual citizens. Hey, I agree with that. He says, those like Ilhan Omar, of course, who are loyal to Somalia, which I don't even know why I've never seen an indication that she is more loyal to Somalia than the United States. Absolutely possible. And if it's the case, then that should matter. Or really, the bigger picture is if she has dual citizenship, then that should matter before we even get to this point. This is not some fake point to go after Israel. I think it matters no matter what country you're from if you've got dual citizenship because it could influence your opinions. But he makes this about I mean, you obviously know where this goes. And Nick Sorter, as I've called out many times, is part of this manipulation as much as many don't seem to see it. That's my opinion. You can decide for yourself. I simply said many Republicans, and there's more than him, are currently doing everything they can to deflect from the gigantic elephant in the room, Zionism, which is what Massey's bill is truly about, and you know it. All dual citizenship should be the issue. Do you agree, Nick Sorter, that Israeli dual citizens should not hold office? Now, not like I expected a response, but I guarantee you that that will not be something they even reference to. I hope I'm wrong, and I'll proudly say it if it happens, but I do not think that's the case. So, at the same time, just to show you a little more of how this is being played, you got Laura Loomer out here trying to like randomly create woke left, woke right kind of stuff by filming this. You know, remember, this is the woman. What's her name again? I forget. Crockett or something. Yeah, Jasmine Crockett. The one I said last time was the ridiculous side of the Democrat side. They're giving you the false binary, right? Where you've got somebody over here making accusations about how everyone that was deported doesn't matter, no rights, who cares? That's the Loomer side. Then you've got her coming in and making at least one statement that's accurate about how, yes, they've got rights, but then going into abortion. And I think that's by design, or they chose her because she wouldn't be able to articulate an answer. Either way, it's ridiculous to pretend like either of those sides are the reality. Obviously, as we'll get into in a minute, for the umpteenth time, it's the most provable thing in the conversation that, yes, even illegal aliens have constitutional rights. It's insulting that we even have to have that conversation every time. We just had a great conversation with Bruce Fein from the Reagan administration, who is an expert in the field of constitutional law and very clearly laying out the obvious. And I shouldn't need to make that point, as it's roundly upheld by the Supreme Court. It's roundly upheld by every constitutional expert. We're dealing with a bunch of uninformed idiots who scream things because of their beliefs that aren't actually rooted in the reality of the very Constitution they think they're fighting for. My point, though, is that this comes back to trying to root it, because the reason my mind goes to that, because that's the conversation I'm referencing of her, where she was on Fox and they were using her as the counterbalance. And I think that's by design. My point is that that's how this always works. When in reality, all they're doing is miring you in your left-right paradigm hatred for each other. But watch this video first. This is Laura Loomer is trying to create an entire, she's already suing this person. She's already got this in court. They're wasting everybody's time. You're wasting lawyers' time, or you're probably paying for it, but I bet you how much you want to bet they got picked up by some PAC that's funded through Israel or something like that. But the point is, clearly, I'm kind of joking, but probably not, probably, who knows, is that ultimately this ends up being, it creates the false binary within the false binary, right? Where she is going after her because she attacked her, when in reality, all she did was put her hand on the camera. But that then creates the action that she's trying to create. Hey, let me play it for you. You'll see what I mean before I'm trying to explain this benign, stupid video.
Hello, Congresswoman. Horse manure. Well, that sounds like fun.
Wait. All these like new influencer Congress, it's all a bunch of, it's like basically the influencer social media field is like become our Congress, or it seems to be going that way. Oops, wrong button.
Crockett. Congresswoman Crockett, you were recently on a Tesla takedown call calling for violence on the 29th. Would you like to clarify your comments?
As you can see.
Congresswoman, will you condone violence at the Tesla?
Okay, here's what's funny to me. They're suing them for assault. That's the woke right for you. They're just as juvenile and stupid as the woke left. The point is, he literally continues telling you the question. So he pretty clearly was not assaulted. She put her hand on the camera lens, and they're making everything else up, wasting everybody's time. And this is what the people like Laura do. It's dishonest, it's disgusting, it's manipulative, and that's why they'll cry foul about January 6th being called an insurrection, which it shouldn't be because it's not, but then go and call the smallest thing in response, or in a couple people sitting in a library an insurrection, and swear to God it's the case. It's just these people are the ones that are manipulating everybody, and they may not even know it. Frankly, I don't think Laura's smart enough to realize that she's being used this way, but either way, it doesn't matter to me. I said the woke right. And now Nick jumps in and says, the U.S. Capitol Police have referred the assault case against Jasmine Crockett to the U.S. attorney. She's absolutely cooked. God, it's so childish and silly. I just don't know who supports these people. It's so childish. Everything about this is so juvenile. But this is what they're pointing to get you mired in this conversation. When in reality, much bigger things are happening in the world. Sal the Agorist says, by their own admission, tomorrow, marks 5 weeks the Trump administration has been sitting on the Epstein client list. How many arrests have been made? Why can't we see the list? Where is it? Who has possession of it? Why is no one asking these questions? That's a good thought. But don't worry, we're gonna sue Crockett because she put her hand on your camera as you manufacture outrage for partisan manipulation. This is what those people should be screaming about if they mean anything they ever say. We're gonna go after the JFK debacle that didn't change the story. We're gonna highlight Epstein information didn't actually come out. What about DC Drano? What about Libs of TikTok? Where's all the binder information you swore would come? My God, I don't know how these people keep getting influence over the conversation. Now, talking about the real elephant in the room, Zionism, the thing that they will never really call out, not if at all, not in earnest, because the truth is that it is the scourge of our times, guys. This is the problem we're all dealing with, whether we realize it or not. Craig Molkheiber, Israel has peppered Western countries like the US, UK, Switzerland, Canada, and others with Israel proxy cells that function as today's brown shirts, i.e. harassment groups like Batar US, set up to punish any human rights defender, journalist, student, professor, or public figure that dares to speak out on Israel's atrocities, like they're doing to Palestinians, to a much more severe degree. The direct collaboration of Western governments with these groups and the mobilization of law enforcement on their behalf is a threat to every decent person. They must be exposed, opposed, prosecuted, where possible, and held accountable in courts of law and in public discourse. Fight this fascism. 100%. He also adds on the 28th, he says, darkness is falling across the globe. He says, in my 4 decades in the international human rights movement, he's a human rights lawyer, I have seen much cruelty in all corners of this world, but I have never witnessed the kind of unmitigated evil demonstrated today by political Zionism. Adherents of this ruthless, hateful, deeply racist, and fundamentally violent ideology are now in power in the lawless United States government and that of other Western governments, putting us all at risk. They are not, see, just to pause, guys. This is why I'm so adamant about this. There are plenty of people in plenty of other countries around the world that are very aware of what a serious risk this has become, because it's gone from violent rhetoric for manipulation to the possibility that Israel will use these entities to create real conflict. And that was always on the table. But obviously, if you know that that's the way it's going down, they're much less reserved to use somebody else to accomplish the outcome. But he goes, they are not only torturing, raping, and slaughtering innocent Palestinians, all of which is now verifiable through Israeli media, bombing and occupying several countries, corrupting governments across the West, arresting and deporting human rights defenders and students in the United States, harassing those who dare to speak up, and dismantling our democratic institutions. But they are tearing down international law and the very principles of human morality itself. No malign force since the Nazism of the 1930s has represented such a grave threat to the world. And you could argue that we're dealing with the same threat. Either we defeat it or it will destroy us. Thankfully, Jews, Christians, Muslims, atheists, and others around the globe are indeed standing up in record numbers. This is what I'm telling you, to fight this evil. And that is the light we must work to spread. Guys, from the beginning of this, the first couple of months of this is what we were really feeling. The massive global movement that they very clearly really what we saw was a massive global movement of both the youth, but a lot of other people it spread like wildfire. And that's why they mobilized the whole Jews speaking up against anti-Semitism conversation in Columbia University and the rest, right? But they then created the pushback and made it all anti-Semitism. Didn't really work, but it got enough of it to kind of deviate the conversation. And now we can just see that no matter how much momentum we had, the governments are either too compromised, too blackmailed, or too Zionist to care, which is insane. But this is what we've been seeing. And now we're a year plus into this ongoing multi-state genocide. Caitlin Johnstone. We're going to come back to this discussion in a second, but she says, I have said it before and I'll say it again. Zionism is the single greatest threat to civil liberties in our society. Now, good luck trying to call her a racist, guys. Definitely on the list. She's a Democrat, self-professed, very much an advocate for human rights, like myself. I just make sure I'm not a partisan element, guys. I don't partake on either of the sides. But the point is, the best they can do is go, you're racist. You hate Jewish people. And you could look, it takes a half a brain cell to look at how often and how long she's been fighting against all of these things, all racism. So that's how flimsy. That's why this is failing. Because she's calling this out. It's not about Jewish people. It's about a political ideology that is killing people. Zionism is the single greatest threat to civil liberties in our society. Israel's Western backers are stomping out free speech throughout the Western world to silence criticism of a genocidal apartheid state. It's that simple. Now, just to include some important points, it's also, I think, very relevant to the point about why we could argue we're fighting the same thing, to recognize that even as Haaretz reported in 2023, the Lehigh Party, Zionism, that's one of the foundational parts of the beginning of Zionism, Lehigh Party continued to seek an ally with Nazi Germany even after the final solution had begun, as in the Holocaust. If you do not know this, ask yourself how that's possible. As it says, transcripts of Zettler's interrogation were released, this is Haaretz, to the public last month, this was in 2023, by the Israel State Archives, including information on the dark chapter of Zionism's history, its ties with Nazi Germany. We will communicate with any military power ready to help with the establishment of the Kingdom of Israel, even if it's Germany. So that really puts a stick in the spokes to the whole argument that they were there to, or rather that they were created to never again against the thing that they were literally allowing to happen or working alongside as long as they got what they wanted. Because that is the reality, guys. Zionism's military org's effort to recruit Nazis in the fight against the British are revealed. That's Haaretz for you. Right? Here's Dan Cohen. The Lehigh Party continues to seek an ally with Nazi Germany even after the final solution had begun. And there's evidence in their own documentation about trying to align themselves with Stalin. Really just any fascist element that would give them what they wanted. That's why they were attacking the British. The British are the ones that gave them to the Balfour Declaration, Palestine. All very clear. Herzl himself was an atheist. That's the founder of Zionism, guys. This is very clear stuff. This been shut off and ignored for a long time because people were afraid to be called racist. You could read about it for yourself. So you can't pretend this is built against that, even though they were literally aligned with the group that was carrying it out. Seems pretty simple to me. Now, this was one part of a conversation we had in 2024, Zionism versus Nazism, Israel's connection to extremist ideology, and the ADL's history of faking Nazi marches, like provably, called out by even our media, even our government, caught faking Nazi marches using the ADL. It's very, very real, guys. Dan Cohen and I had a conversation. I'll play a clip from him in a second. The manufactured Middle East plight and the Zionism linchpin. I had two different interviews with Zachary Foster. He has a PhD in Palestinian history. This one's called The Documented and Suppressed History of Palestine and Zionism. This one was called Zachary Foster PhD Interview, The True Origin of Hamas and the Decline of Apartheid Israel. Also had a great interview with David Icke about Sabbateanism, Zionism infiltration of Judaism, weaponized migration, and the mainstream alt media. This is really important. We had this in 2024 to what's currently happening in the alt media as well. But here, let me play a clip of Dan Cohen speaking about Zionism. And I said, is Zionism, or this was posted by Jason, who, by the way, Bassler, I'm going to get him back eventually once we get some more funds rolling in to get more clips going. But is Zionism the only ideology that feeds off the hate and uses it to reinforce its existence? We discussed that with Dan Cohen. Perspective, right? As a Jewish person yourself and what you've talked about in the past, the two sides of it. The aggressive misrepresentation of Jews in this conversation around how Jews run the world, or, that in my opinion, very clearly is a Zionist ploy in and of itself. And on the other side of it, the complete disregard for what Zionism truly is, when people saying it's racist to point out what this political organization is doing. So kind of go at that however you'd like. I just want your thoughts and the audience to hear how you view this. What is Zionism? Why is this important to what we just discussed today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually extremely relevant. And you really can't understand what Israel is if you don't understand, you can judge it by its actions and you can look at patterns, but you have to understand its ideology in order to understand, where it's going, what it really is. You have to understand what animates its actions, and it is not it is not, obviously Israel's not a normal country, and that's not because it's ultra aggressive or has so many weapons. These are, it's or because it bombs babies, and even those are symptoms. The occupation, the genocide, these are symptoms of the real fundamental issue, which is Zionism. It's its ideology. And I think, one of the I think we're seeing a number of kind of psyops. I think basically more and more people are, when you basically have the what Zionists believe, or what Zionists claim, that Zionism is Jewish self-determination, or is, Israel's the state of the Jews, Israel is a Jewish state. Then as people, and in the US, basically it looks like everything that the US government does and Europe does is for Israel, aka the Jews. Then some people will say, yeah, we have to support them because look at what happened to them. Look at the Holocaust, look at all the historic persecution. They're our closest ally. This is what we hear all the time from both political parties, and, they're surrounded by terrorists and all these things. But people more and more then begin to understand, wait a minute, what are we actually getting? How does America benefit from this? From, basically helping, quote unquote, the Jews by doing this stuff for the Jews. The Jews, if we accept the Zionist definition that Israel is the Jews, well then they're actually sabotaging us. They're getting us into more and more wars that we don't benefit from at all, that actually endanger us. We're sending more and more money overseas. We're not helping the people here in our country. And look what the Jews are doing. This is like Jewish influence. That's kind of I think the psyop, the other side of the psyop. So basically, like on X, since Elon took over, really since the Gaza war started, there is a huge amount of accounts. And I kind of bookmark some of these tweets that are, openly anti-Semitic, that just, the Jews all the time. And they're capitalizing off of what Israel is doing, and the Zionist conflation of Jews and it's, and Israel and Zionism. And the thing is, this actually serves Zionism because it maintains the basic it reinforces the basic Zionist definition that Israel and Jews are synonymous. So Elon Musk, early on when he took over, he said our policy is going. He said we're not going to overtly censor unless there's calls for violence. What we're going to do, what did he say? It's freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach.
Right.
So if Elon Musk, who works with the Anti-Defamation League, the Israel lobby outfit, it works with the ADL, and is close with Benjamin Netanyahu, and is a Zionist himself, if he didn't want, or whatever, the real powers that control X did not want that to be out there, that stuff would be shadow banned or silenced, or you would not be able to see. It's just viral, and there are a number of very big shady influencers who promote this stuff all the time, constantly. And I really think this is actually, well, objectively, it serves Zionism because it reinforces this paradigm that Jews equal the state of Israel.
Can I say one thing real quickly, just to add to your point?
Sure.
And so the point being is that what he outlined right there is really important. That Twitter clearly has been censoring people saying from the river to the sea, right? Or free Palestine. We have examples of that, but yet then allow overtly, Jews do this and they're controlling that. And so his point is that there's no way you can pretend that that's not an allowance kind of situation. And not only does it allow, can continue the conflation as you're outlining. It's what Zionism wants that perception to be, so it justifies its existence through that illusion. So go ahead. I just want to make sure that was for people listening.
Precisely that. And so it's Zionists don't care if you like them. They actually want you to hate them,
right?
But only in the correct, in a certain way. They want you to think that they are Jews, or they're acting out of Judaism, or they're following the Talmud or something like that, because then that's where they derive their legitimacy from. Then they can say, well, you're an anti-Semite, you just hate Jews. The Holocaust happened because of people like you, and there's a long history of that, and this is persecution of us. When in fact, that serves their agenda. They feed on hate.
Very much so. Now, obviously, that's important just because it's objectively, the reality is clear of how that's being used. But Dan, as a Jewish person himself and an excellent researcher, I've even just watched his evolution around this topic as post October 7th, and very clearly identifying how this is being used, but also very clearly has the courage to call out at a very difficult time what Zionism actually is, because he's honest. That's important. That deserves a lot of credit. So, to go through a couple important points here about what we're seeing in regard to Israel, okay? Right now, this is what we're talking about. So we're talking about this entity that is quite literally influencing the outcome of U.S. policy. And not only that, but effectively stopping that apparatus from even identifying what they're doing right now in real time to, even American citizens in some situations. But we're talking about Syria, we're talking about Gaza, we're talking about Lebanon, we're talking about, even more than that. There's different examples we could make, but just to keep it to the overlapping current Middle East discussion, all of those locations there are people being bombed, children being killed, people being starved. You could include Yemen, quite frankly, seeing as how Israel has adamantly, they even just called out the whole signal thing, saying they were mad because their information got released, basically proving what we were saying, which anybody paying attention already knew, that it was Israel's war. But here is what Saeed Mohammed Randi points out. Watch the Nazi occupation force in action. And this isn't Gaza, guys. This is in Ramallah. IDF people bursting into a bakery, jamming this person's head in the food he's making, beating them up. No justification. This happens every single day. Every single day in the West Bank, and people get beaten up just for being Palestinian. And look, even if you want to claim, maybe they broke the law. Okay, that doesn't necessitate violence without any kind of immediate, hey, we're here to arrest you. Put your hands behind your back. It's amazing the amount of sidestep people get when they call themselves the only democracy in the Middle East and then hold zero accountability to any of the metrics through which we make that allegation. I think allegation is appropriate. I think democracy is not what we want. But the point is, this is what they live through, guys. Now, here is the Red Cross telling you what's been going on. Just one of an endless amount of examples about how they are kidnapping people that are paramedics, bombing ambulances. Remember when that used to be like back and forth? There was a narrative and we debated it for weeks. Every day this happens and nobody cares because it isn't new. It was just new to some people that weren't aware of it. But the controlling power structure has been aware of it for a long time. And as long as they can put you back to sleep, Israel will keep murdering people with no consequence.
5 days of silence. 5 days of fear. The Palestine Red Crescent Society is once again awaiting news on the fate of our ambulance teams. 5 days ago, a PRCS ambulance came under fire while it was on its way to evacuate wounded people in Rafah. More teams rushed to save both civilians and our injured colleagues. They were besieged. They were attacked. Contact was lost. The silence is unbearable. Since the beginning of the war, 19 PRCS members were killed while on duty. We cannot bear to add more names to this tragic list. PRCS calls on the international community to take serious measures to protect our medical teams.
You have to realize there's not an allegation that this is somehow Hamas. They just don't care. If pushed, I'm sure they would just say, oh, they're Hamas. And your blind Western government wouldn't care. That's probably why they don't even bring up an excuse, because they know no one's even challenging them. But the reality is this never stops. They're bombing hospitals, they're bombing mosques, they're bombing churches, all of which are indeed provably happening. And pushed, they'll just make a narrative. But the reality is the evidence by investigative groups, by human rights groups, by doctors on the ground is that you can see everything and prove that they're lying about it. Prove that they're lying about it. Hala points out they coordinated with the Red Cross. They went in to save lives. Israel executed all 16 of them. Ambulance crews, first responders, then buried the bodies and destroyed the vehicles. This isn't self-defense. This is a war crime, a massacre, and the world is still silent. Execution of 16 ambulance workers following their coordination with the International Red Cross. And this is how this works, guys. That means they talk to them, they talk to Israel, and Israel says, okay, we know you're coming, you're good, go ahead. And then they bomb them, kill them, rape them, torture them, whatever they do anyway. That happens all the time. I mean, if they're going to literally square up on Hindra Job in a car by herself and open fire, which that has been definitively proven, then you know these people are absolute monsters. And let's not pretend like each one of these are just individual choices. Some of them may be, but we can see the consistency from the leadership that this is why it's going on. They are targeting anybody trying to help, anybody trying to save, anybody trying to repair, anybody trying to feed. They're bombing everything. Everyone in the world knows this. It has any gumption, any constitution, any integrity, because it has been proven. And I don't use that word lightly. Jonathan Cook, journalist himself, says this isn't a run of particularly bad luck for Israel. Of 18 months of committing accidental war crimes, the war crimes are the goal. Killing medics, killing journalists, killing aid workers, killing children, wiping out entire families, that's the point. If we had any honesty in our governments, this is like pretending there's not collapsing athletes when the numbers are so much more than anything we've seen in that time period. You can argue it's not the shots, sure, but we need to address why kids are dropping dead, right? Nah, it's not the thing, so shut up about it. That showed you something, right? We knew. Not that we knew exactly. I think we all knew probably what it was. We didn't know. We knew that there was a problem, though. We knew that because every study, FIFA study, soccer study, everything I showed you, you could prove it using metrics. The numbers were shocking, 10 times more than they ever were in those month periods. Nobody cared. Okay, same thing here. We know this. Just compare the amount of children, the amount of every metric you have from this entire situation. And if you shy away at genocide because you're a coward, that's fine. Let's call it war crimes. Are you going to pretend like killing this many children are not war crimes? Starving, deliberately starving people is not war crimes? I mean, you can go on forever. It's by design. And your government's a part of it. 8 UNRWA staff. But I guess that doesn't matter because UNRWA is Hamas. Are we still just pretending that makes sense? Despite the fact that even the UK and the US said you never proved that. And all we get is morons like Tom Cotton screaming the same narrative because they're funded by Israel. Guys, this is insane that they can just murder UN workers, even if you want to say they're Hamas. Obviously, it matters that Israel funds Hamas, right? No, we don't talk about that. But let's recognize that even if you claim they are something, these are being executed while in an official position. I mean, this is like somebody going in as a politician of another government, having them execute them on the ground and say they're Hamas. Okay, then in every case, by the way, that should be something they prove, but especially when it's something in official position, right? They should say, here's the evidence. They never do that. And every time they do this, when they try to about UNRWA, they get proven to be lying. That's why they just don't even try anymore. If any other country, Ryan says, did this, they would be held accountable. And you know that, even if they were lying about it. Here, this hospital, they bombed, the Al-Nusra hospital. Or no, Al-Nusra, excuse me. Or wait, was that the Nassar hospital? I forget which one. That's frustrating. The one that we just recently discussed, they bombed, right? It was a big story for a couple of days because they targeted these people. They executed doctors. The point is, what you're seeing here is random raw footage of that location 20 hours before the video, before they bombed the hospital. And this is what you're going to see every time, guys, because everyone is sheltering in these places. Children, women, disabled people. They were trying to give these kids some semblance of life. Now, most of them probably died because they were in this building when it got bombed. I hope that's not the case. Saeed Mohammed also points out Zionist rapers and child killers have bombed a school in southern Lebanon. So it's not just Israel, guys, or rather occupied Palestine. They're bombing hospitals in Lebanon. In what world would any other government, any other person, anything, anywhere else be able to get away with this? How do you not see what that shows you? Now this is just an ongoing, this is a minute and 43 seconds long. What you're seeing here, you can independently verify for yourself. 1 minute, 40 seconds long. 50,021 full names, IDs, date of birth. 876 of them are under the age of 1. 15,607 of them under the age of 18. This is just what they can prove. Now, you want to tell me how you can't independently step back? Like, this is how this will go this way the further this goes forward, unless Israel can somehow annihilate every essence of this from the world, that we can prove that they knew these were all innocent people. The reality is, in what other world do you get a complete, identified, meticulous breakdown of names, IDs? Because, look, you want to say they're lying? They'd go through and prove they're lying. The reality is, you can cross-reference this, and they are showing you who they've proven are killed. These aren't Hamas members. Most of them are children. The problem is, this will never get regarded by the obviously dishonest power structures of the world today. You're not going to get this about the people they claim they're killing. You're not going to get this in any other context because it just doesn't happen. Saeed also points out the Zionist regime, their high court in Israel, just ruled that the international law does not apply to the war in Gaza, which that shouldn't be shocking to you. We've talked about this many times. Here's just a quick search on Brave. The Israeli Supreme Court has ruled the international laws of war just simply don't apply in Gaza. Perfect, right? That makes sense. Why not? If they can just investigate themselves and say we're not guilty, why not just go, you know what? None of it matters. Stop bothering us. Apparently, this, again, shouldn't be surprising. We've talked about this many times. I'll show you that in a second. Here's Max Blumenthal's point. This is Nev Gordon saying, after a full year, the petition submitted March 2024, Israel Supreme Court rejects appeal to allow humanitarian aid to Gaza, claiming that, quote, the IDF and their respondents went above and beyond to enable the provision of humanitarian aid to Gaza. And it goes on to list a bunch off. The point is they're ruling on their own side that we don't have to give them anything, even though they're legally required to, because of the obvious reality of the situation, because of the removal of people from occupied territory, the fact that they have the right to return, doesn't matter how long that goes on, and the fact that they've never been allowed to is why they are getting aid. It's simple. They could give back what's legally required to be given back, and the whole thing would go away. But they don't want that because that's the whole point of it all. They covet this territory. Max says Israel's Supreme Court, regarded by Western liberals as an enlightened bastion, ruled in favor of starvation of Gaza as a weapon. It did. One justice described the war against Amalek as obligatory. Amalek being a biblical reference to annihilating everybody, including children. Obligatory obviously meaning they're required to do so. But let's keep pretending like we don't know they're publicly committing genocide. All Israeli state institutions are mobilized for genocide, he says. Israel is irredeemable. Now, let's not forget, you can read this. This is if you're willing to just, it doesn't matter. It's on Mondevice, which is a site that some of these people will blindly dismiss. The point is, you can read this directly from their document or Haaretz, which I've already gone through this personally many times. The point is that in this discussion, they publicly say, and they've done this more than once, Israel says it's allowed to ignore international law anywhere it wants. It was in the conversation of the West Bank, and these people stood up in the Knesset and ruled aggressively that, look, if we can violate the law anywhere in the world, why wouldn't we be able to in West Bank? That was their argument. And I've gone over this many, many times. There's literally a document directly back to a Hebrew document for the Knesset. It's all easily verifiable. Here's what I find interesting. So historically, they've made that argument. They recently just ruled again, like we just showed you, that law doesn't apply to Gaza. Here's what I find most telling. This is from yesterday. So the difference is what they say amongst themselves, right? What Netanyahu says to people over there, and then the way they present to it in English to the American audience that somehow isn't able to cross-reference those things. Here's the difference. Here's what they present to you over here. Israel flouting international law with forced evacuations in Gaza, says the UN. Not that part. At the very least, they're breaking the law. But it says the UN accused Israel on Friday of violating international law because of their mandatory evacuation orders, which is the same as always. They're moving them around, bombing them everywhere they go. It's torture, guys. A year of that, by the way. These evacuations, it says, fail to comply with the requirements of international law, like every other part of what they're doing. Now, it says Israel's permanent mission to Geneva told Reuters yesterday that it was operating in accordance with international law. Oh, which is what they say on the shows, right? Quote, Israel's evacuating civilians to protect them from Hamas terrorists who relentlessly use them as human shields. The same old tired response, even though we can prove that's not true. And we've got 40,000 examples just since October 7th of Israel getting caught using human shields, even to the point to where they publicly acknowledge the new one called mosquito procedure. Guys, it's insanely obvious. My point is, in front of their own people, they're going, law doesn't apply to us. Gaza doesn't count. But then when they speak to the Western audiences, they go, we're following the law that we just convinced our own people doesn't even matter. This is how insanely stupid this all is. They're in front of you, or rather the media that's going to lie to you about what they say, saying that we all follow all the laws that you all think are supposed to matter, and then they stand up in front of the Knesset and go, why does this matter? This law doesn't apply to us. That's what's going on in Israel. I'm talking about Israeli leadership. And then you get stuff like this from the supposed journalists that are being completely influenced in this country. Alan McLeod says, behold, the dumbest take you've ever seen in your life. Michael Grove for the, I forget the platform, the Jewish something commission or something like that. The article reads, the title reads, the IDF should be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. He says, thank God Israel had the courage to sometimes ignore the most powerful ally. Right. Nobel Peace Prize. So that's, the dumbest take you ever heard in your life. They're committing genocide. The whole world knows it, but let's do it. This is my point about the reactive Israeli propaganda. Instead of just going, let me convince you why they're not committing a genocide, they got to go, no, they're doing the best ever. More pinpoint targeted than ever. They've got more food than they've ever had in their lives. Right. It's just, it's dumb. Like you should have just cut your losses and been like, not that bad. Instead they got to go the best ever. Here we are. IDF should be nominated for Nobel Peace Prize while they're committing genocide. Now, Ryan Grimm makes a good response to this, and it's kind of the same point. So Elon Levy, he does still exist, which is insane. He says how it started, how it's going. And he shows The Economist. And I do think it's an excellent point, actually, not in the way he thinks it is, though. They put out the article that says Israel alone. Why? Because that was the thing they were doing at the time. That was the narrative. They were still pushing the aggressive propaganda because Israel was supposed to be the one attacked and we're the victim. And that's the media followed suit like they always do. Then the writing was on the wall, right? After a year of genocide, even the most ardent Israel blind supporters were opportunists. They all are. And so they go, well, shoot, we can see everyone's leaning. And then the next article is Israel's hubris. Not Israel's genocide, mind you. Just here's why Israel went too far. That's milquetoast compared to what's going on. Of course, he wants you to think that's because they've been compromised, changed their mind. I mean, I don't even know what point you're trying to make, bud. But Rachel Gurr says sometimes you just can't win as a Jew. You mean aside from the first one that was what you wanted? So how does that make sense? So it says, wait, I think we have a word for that. Oh, you know what she means? Anti-Semitism. I mean, it's just lazy. I actually don't think people like this even realize how lazy and stupid they sound. Here's what Ryan Grimm said. Yes, I can't think of any reason the world might have turned against Israel other than bigotry, right? They must just hate Jews. He goes, your country has blockaded all food and medicine from reaching a civilian population that was once 2.3 million people. And I'll add also to your own people that were there that you pretended you wanted to save, right? He goes, they are now resorting to pet food. It's 2025, not the 14th century. You can't starve a civilian population in 2025 and also ask to be celebrated for it. And you could have gone so many other directions. My point is that you have this obvious game. That's what Dan Cole was just talking about. Oh, you just can't win as a Jew. Who even mentioned Jewish people? See, Elon Levy is trying to make it about that in everything he does. They work off each other. And her argument is not that they just murdered children, raped people, and proudly displayed it, have been caught lying 100,000 ways over, but just because the Economist must just suddenly now hate Jews, even though they did it before. Yeah, okay, evidence? Nah, just you're scared of that word, so run away. It's dumb. Like, it's embarrassing. And Ryan Graham's going, yeah, maybe it's because you murdered people, but nah, we must just hate Jews. It's almost cartoonish how that even used to work. That's not to say that there might not be an overlap. I guarantee somebody out there does and may also think the point because Israel. Doesn't change the fact that it is because Israel. But here is another doctor we pointed out more than once. He is now speaking again about, I'll show you a couple of stories I think are important. Trita Parsi says, if any other country did this, the quote West would lose its mind and go to war. Now, not even a condemnation. A Palestinian orthopedic nurse was shot in the knee by Israeli soldiers. And you've seen that this is forget, it says his name in the beginning. I forget off the top of my head. He's been calling stuff out for a while now. He's still in Gaza. He saw a nurse get shot right by him. And think of the courage of this man. He says, for refusing to stop operating on a patient they were working on. He's later taken prisoner by the Israelis for 45 days. When the Israelis confirmed he isn't Hamas, they took out his eye, dropped him on the other side of the border, forcing him to crawl for 3 kilometers. That's to somebody that they find out isn't Hamas. Yeah, what does that show you? They hate Palestinians, no matter what. And if you can go ahead and retort with, because look at what happens October 7th, because you're stupid enough to already not know, maybe you don't care, that Israel killed more people on October 7th than anybody else. But that's facts. I know that's not part of the game.
Dr. Perlmutter, I know that you treated a local healthcare worker by the name of Tamir.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Sure. And this story will argue against the accusations that, or the claims of the IDF that nobody was targeted, no innocent person was targeted. Tamir is an orthopedic nurse. He was in the operating room closing a wound after a surgery when an Israeli soldier came into another hospital, not the one we were working in. This is a hospital that was already occupied by the IDF. They ordered him to abandon the patient who he was closing the wound on. He refused to do so. So he was shot in the knee. His proximal tibia bone, or his shin bone, was sent across the room. He was obviously unconscious from that assault. He was then operated on. He recovered the next day, consciousness. The next day, he was taken prisoner by the Israelis and taken into Israel to an Israeli prison. He was handcuffed. He was blindfolded for 45 days. He received absolutely no wound care. He was fed a juice box, by his report to me, sometimes every day, mostly every other day. And then on the 45th day, after they discovered that he wasn't Hamas, they let him go by dumping him on the side of the road on the other side of the border. He crawled for 3 kilometers. His wound is now horribly infected. As a goodbye present, they gave him a rifle butt in his right eye. They blew out his globe, meaning that he's blind forever. And he crawled and was picked up by a passerby and was brought to the hospital where we took care of him. Okay. So he was tortured. He was starved, tortured, totally abused, received no medical care, and initially shot when he didn't have to be shot for doing his job delivering health care.
And again, we should note that CNN has reached out to the IDF for comment on this. Obviously, we can't independently verify these allegations and the disturbing description that you just provided us.
Yeah, the opposite of what they do in any other conversation about Israel, right? When the IDF comes on and makes all these grandiose lies that we can prove are lies, they never say that. Well, we can independently verify what you just said. Obviously, you're having a live interview with somebody you can't. I mean, it's just insane the kind of watering down they do. The man literally saw it and has been constantly highlighting these things. It's just gross. You must be able to see what this shows you. There's another clip I want to show you, and I'll include my thread of 40 plus doctors all telling you what they've seen in Gaza. All of it is overlapping in the same conversation: rape, torture, murder, human shields, on and on and on and on. This is the one I played the other day. I just think it's relevant because of how it's crazy what this person, what they're doing right now. It seems more severe than it even did in the beginning, which I don't even know how that makes sense unless this is not even just about October 7th.
Orthopedic surgeon colleague here who was taken out of the operating room. His fingers were crushed. They showed him a picture of his wife from a spy, not from a magazine or an old photo, and it had a metadata and said it was taken the day before, up close, and said, we're going to bring her here in front of you and we're going to gang rape her in front of you if you don't admit that you're Hamas, or we'll keep breaking your fingers. Right. So if we're forcing you to admit that you are Hamas by threatening to rape your wife. So that means they know you're not. They're working to get numbers.
They're working to create an illusion so they can share a video on Twitter about a guy pretending to admit to be Hamas, and all of the same right screamers online that you know are going to point to that and say, we knew it. You're all Muslim supporting race, whatever. You already know how this works. You have to, and it's as easy as to point back to the beginning, which you can currently self-prove for yourself. All those clips they showed you of those trembling Palestinians in white clothing that were saying, yes, I raped that girl, and now, yes, I did this. Well, we now know as a matter of fact that none of that happened. The guy said, babies in the oven, they're all on video. And what did the same people do? The same Tom Cottons and Mark Rubios, they screamed that we knew these people were monsters, even though we know as a matter of fact, none of that even happened. Even Schumer just literally repeated the 40 beheaded babies again. We're being lied to from the highest levels of power. Either they're Zionists or they're blackmailed. Or some level around that, guys. There's no way to misunderstand this.
He still didn't admit he was a Muslim. And they said, well, then we're going to send a drone through your bedroom window and incinerate your children. And he still wouldn't admit he was Hamas. They beat him every time he asked to speak to a lawyer, and beat him twice as hard after he spoke to his lawyer. And he spent 11 months in prison having probes inserted up his rectum by female IDS members who said that the probe was soaked in pork blood.
God. That's just so rough. Well, not as if we didn't already know. This is a new one from today. Okay, this is The Independent. Inside Israel's torture jails. Funny how they've been screaming about torture tunnels or whatever they keep talking about. Rape dungeons. I mean, it's as always, it seems that's them projecting what they're doing. And even they have zero evidence of any of that stuff coming from the side of Hamas. Never to say that's not possible. But anybody objective can clearly see that there's no evidence. Everyone they've released has said that they kept them well, they fed them, they protected them with their own bodies. And here we have the actual torture prisons, the actual rape dungeons, what they're pointing to. Israel's torture jails, where Palestinians held without charge tell of brutal treatment. I'm not even going to read through this because it's the same repetition of all the stuff you know is happening. They're beating people with no reason. They're raping and torturing and starving and everything you already know about. And now even The Independent is covering that. And again, not like you didn't already know then. We talked about this November 8th of 2023, a month after we were in horrifying cases of torture and degrading treatment of Palestinian detainees. This one is BBC from August 5th, 2024. Blindfolded, bound, and beaten. Palestinians tell of Israeli jail abuse. Here, this is the United Nations from July 31st. There's hundreds of these. UN report, Palestinian detainees held arbitrarily, secretly, subjected to torture, mistreatment. Here's the B'Tselem, leading Israeli human rights group. Welcome to hell. Talking about Sid Tiemann, the rape dynamic, and the absolute hell these people are put through because they're Palestinian. Now, just in case you didn't know, still to this very day, this is today, these are Israelis in Israel protesting for Israel to stop the genocide, holding up pictures of dead Palestinian babies and Palestinian children, kids, young teens. Just recognize that this, as much as people, especially on the screaming right, don't want you to recognize this, I keep telling you, there's a rapidly growing grouping of people in Israel, but all around the world, Jewish, Israeli, or otherwise, who are calling out what's going on. As it says, now in Tel Aviv, they say even we, killed more than 15,000 children. Stop supplying the genocide. So you have to acknowledge this, guys. These are people in Israel who are Israeli Jews who are protesting against their killing of Palestinians, not just because they want to stop the killing of their people who are there. That's a huge part of it, I think the majority, but there's groups that are fighting for Palestinians. Stop. Don't let the world lie to you about these situations to carve you into one of their narratives, one of their subjective partisan sides, or just one of the assumptive areas of this. It's bigger. It's obvious what's going on, and people are waking up. Now we are at just over 3 hours. I wanted to go more. I want to play you a couple things on this, and I might just leave some of this for tomorrow or the next day. But I want to make sure we highlighted some of this to at least get one part of this. And this is in regard to because I've actually done a lot recently about specifically the deportation. I mean, it's a very important story, but I put it on the latter half because or the end, because I feel like we've talked a lot about it and covered it pretty strongly, I think. But truly, it is terrifying, guys. It is if not one of the largest attacks I've seen on this country's inherent rights in my doing this. Now, this is from 26th of March this year, more unconstitutional deportations and the rapid decline of American liberty. And I went over 4 or 5 new ones that were pretty wild. Almost all of them, except one, were legally in this country. I think predominantly green cards. I think one of them was a visa, and they were all just deported because they simply supported Palestine. One of them simply wrote an op-ed years ago about Israel committing genocide. Here is an actual quote. This is actually what they said in Trump's State Department. We'll revoke the visas of whoever it is that fits within the category of what it is we're deciding is going to get your visa revoked. What did I tell you guys? The same circular logic of the government is it's Obama bombing people. If you're there, you're a combatant because you were there. It's the same dumb stuff they always do, leaning into your biases. Let's be clear. Even if everything she says is the case, the point is, even if they're a terrorist, even if they plan, you have to prove that. You have to give them due process to present the evidence of why you claim they're the thing they are. And if they are, then it's easy. You don't even need the Aliens Enemy Act. You can deport them right away because they're committing crime, right? See, they're trying to create this opaque circumstance to give themselves the benefit of the doubt without presenting any evidence because they know you'll buy into it because you already hate these people for some of them. The truth is, whether or not they are what you say they are, everybody gets that due process. And that's what they're trying to manipulate you on.
But that we'll revoke the visas of whoever it is that fits within the category of what it is we're deciding is going to get your visa revoked, which is...
That's really what she said. Everything means nothing. Nothing means everything, right? We will decide to deport you if what we're doing, what we want to deport you for, fits within what we've decided is enough to get you deported. That's what she said. That means nothing, guys.
It's illegal activity, essentially.
Right. And they get to decide what is and is not illegal. That's just like every other circumstance. That's not how this process works. Let's even say fine. Let's just even say that's how it would work. You are still supposed to present the evidence. That in what world are you not required to prove your claims against somebody for anything, especially deportation, because that is under Reno versus Flores Supreme Court ruling is in particular deportation cases.
And I do know that from our own conversations here, that here we go. The department, I can say this specifically, revokes visas every day in order to secure America's borders and keep our communities safe, and will continue to do so.
Yeah. Okay, right there. Fine. In every one of those cases, you are required by law, the law you swear an oath to prove those things. And the fact that anybody in this country pretends like that's not just the most benign expected reality in a country that pretends to follow the law and people's rights and be the better presenting example for the world. Guys, that's exactly what we all know this country believes it is. For them to just go narrative, no matter what narrative it is, and no matter how much you believe that narrative, even if it's all true, you can't just go narrative. That's why we don't have to do the thing we all know we're supposed to do. It is required by law. So the deportations, the visas you remove, yeah, you have to show here's why, here's the evidence, remove it. Okay, simple. Takes half a second. They're not doing that though. That's the point. And now being caught for how we can prove that the many, if not all, are not actually what they claim they are. And that's why. That's why they create the act to circumvent those things, or at least pretend they can. That's why they declare certain groups terrorists, to pretend like that then meets what's necessary, none of which is being proven. And that's the real point of the holdup with that judge. Now they're going, I'm probably going to talk about more in the next show. They're going after it like crazy. He probably is very radically active. The point is they're going after his daughter now, saying she's worked done. Look at the conflict. Even if all that's true, it does not change the reality that what they're simply asking for is that you prove that these people are part of those gangs. And all they do is they bend over, they go out of their way to make up this whole Loomer style narrative to go. That's what they're doing. I don't care, even if all of it's true. It matters, but not in the context of whether or not they are required to give these people due process. It's simple.
Because the process is ongoing, the number of revocations, as I've noted, is dynamic, and the department generally does not provide statistics on visa revocations, Generally, we were not going to add anything at this time. But
so no information on how, when, or what, or when. But just trust us. We're not going to give you any details. We're not going to tell you when or how long. That's what she just said. National security.
Clearly, this is a process that we're committed to and is part of making America safe again.
That's what it is. Don't worry. We're doing it for you. So shut up.
It's within our right. It's within the right of every sovereign nation to make a determination who will stay in this country, who'll be allowed in this country.
Sure.
And the Secretary, of course, has been very clear on this.
Except you left out the part where so you're allowed to do all those things, but you are required by law to prove the claims you're making. It's so simple. And this is how this game works right now, especially in the partisan right, where you create these abstract narratives of web conflict, and ultimately the point doesn't change. It's all distractionary. And much of it is real and relevant. It's just not relevant to the point we're making now, which is that you have all of those rights. You can deport who you want in the context of proving that they violated some law. That's even what they're saying, right? Even though they're not doing that with the Khalil side of this, where they just go, well, he promoted, that they're really trying to say promoted Hamas or terror, and none of those are true. They know they have to do that because they don't have any other standing, because that's why they made it about terrorism, so they can point back to old precedents around deporting people who actually carried out terrorist acts. They're grasping for Israel, guys. The bottom line is, again, that they have to provide evidence of these claims. And we can go over this in so many different ways, and I've done this already, and it's just exhausting. We have to keep doing it, which is this, and I'll just go right to the point. This is one of many, but I think this is important because it was a conservative justice, Scalia. It is well established, he writes in Reno versus Flores, 1993, that the Fifth Amendment entitles aliens to due process of law in deportation proceedings. It's not even a contentious point. It's very easily proven. Constitutional lawyers around the world are speaking up about this. People that are not partisan are very clear. This is typically how that works. Here are just some other screenshots, but it comes from, you can just look this up for yourself. I mean, guys, if you type this into Grok or anybody, they will say, yes, obviously, that's the reality. The Constitution protects all people living in the United States, regardless of immigration status. Most constitutional provisions apply based on personhood, not citizenship. In other words, if an individual is physically present in the United States, they are entitled to the protections granted by the Constitution. It's just exhausting, the partisan game today. Now, here's another clip. This one from yesterday. Aaron, and this is the person that highlighted the, very rightly so, by the way, that early on in the Venezuelan discussion, rather the Venezuelans deported El Salvador illegally, the point, and that's realize illegally, even if they broke the law. That's how this works. You are required to prove those things. And we're not even talking about, in this case, illegally being here, because the one we're discussing had already been given asylum and then didn't have a criminal record. So they, in every possible way, illegally deported him for not even any reason, just claiming he was part of the group that he seems to not even be a part of, and is now trapped in some concentration camp in El Salvador, possibly forever, because it doesn't seem that people even leave that place. But he simply highlights, let's set the record straight. Ramesa or Ozturk, we talked about, has never been charged with a crime. Mohammed Khalil has never been charged with a crime. Mahmoudou Tal has never been charged with a crime. We didn't talk about that one. Badar Khan Suri has never been charged with a crime. People are being deported left and right for ideological reasons. And they're not even trying to hide that anymore. They're saying they wrote an op-ed about Israel. They protested against Israel's genocide. So they're not even trying to manufacture anything. They're just kicking people out of the country who are here legally. How fast that all happened. And at the same time, while he's floating the idea of removing, I almost wonder if he floated the idea of removing Americans to El Salvador because of Teslas to distract from how crazy this is. I mean, I'm not in any way, I am very much concerned about how that might even be what happens next. Wouldn't surprise me. But it's worth thinking about, right? Because even I very quickly jumped at the idea of Americans because that's crazy. And meanwhile, I know you talked about this too, but it's overtaking that part of the conversation.
The secretary also addressed this a couple of times on the trip. He was asked about certain numbers of visas that were revoked. He said he didn't know, but that we'll revoke the visas of whoever it is that fits within the category of what it is we're deciding is going to get your visa revoked.
And she laughed right there. Do you see that? Because she said it again. Actually, I think this is the first time. She laughed because that's idiotic. So basically, you're not even answering. You're saying we've decided what we're going to, we decide what gets you revoked. And if you meet one of the things that we decide, then we'll revoke it. And we get to decide what it is. So everything we want will be applied when we want it to. It's very stupid. And she even smiled when she said it.
He said he didn't know, but that we'll revoke the visas of whoever it is that fits within the category of what it is we're deciding is going to get your visa revoked, which is illegal activity, essentially.
Ah, okay. And that's why, as he says here, she lied. And she did. Aaron says, State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce just blatantly lies and says the students are getting their visas revoked for illegal activity. That's the point. It's not true. Now, we're not talking about the Venezuelan conversation. Because remember, their whole point is, and most of them are accurately, they were correct, most of them are illegally here, which does not change. That's the main point. They still have the right to due process, and that's the reason they were illegally removed. Nonetheless, we're talking about, and this is important here, Khalil, Ozturk, the ones that were removed while they were here legally. And what do they say? They're Hamas supporters. Well, even then, they admitted there was no crime committed. And on top of that, that's not even true. You can prove these things. So they're lying, guys. And you have to see that means they know what they're doing is very, very sketchy. They weren't charged with crimes. That's why they're even saying visa, send a green card for Khalil, because they're trying to make this consistent. They're going to fail unless, I mean, look, you know my opinion. I feel like there's much more coordination across all paradigm. It's a larger government manipulation, and in that sense, maybe none of it will change because they all are doing the same thing. But at some level, somebody will break. I believe that. That's opportunism. Somebody at some level, even especially, I don't think every judge everywhere is all in the same mindset. This can't stand in every possible way. This is easily proven to be false. There has to be some honest person out there willing to take this to task. Maybe Aaron will do it. Now, here's what Rubio said. And that's what Caitlin's pointing out is important. She goes, be clear. Rubio isn't just saying non-citizens have no right to write op-eds criticizing U.S. foreign policy. He's saying that U.S. citizens have no right to read those op-eds. The government is blocking U.S. citizens from hearing political speech and critical thoughts. Now, people can't seem to grasp what she's saying. She's not suggesting he said that. What the point is, functionally, that's how this comes out. He's saying these people aren't allowed to write what they want about this country because they're here on visas, even though that's shockingly stupid and wrong. What she's saying is, in effect, he's stopping you from being able to read what they want to write about this country while they're here. That's the same point. Nonetheless, what he says is wrong. Because he's trying to tell you, and it's the same excuse they keep giving, and he just kind of talks to the end of the clip, which is that if they would have told us they would do this when they got here, then we wouldn't have let them. It's a straw man. Because let's be clear, what they're claiming they didn't even do. Oh, hold on. Yeah, I did forget to grab that. So what I mean by that is obviously what they're saying is these people are, Hamas supporting terrorism. That's not true, guys. All of them, that's why they never were charged with any crime, because that's easily charged with a crime if they were really doing that, right? But so all he says is implying that they did those things, that they somehow violated some trust by not admitting that they would do that when they got here. But they didn't do that. And even then, the argument that you're somehow going to come and be like, I'm going to commit terrorism, and so you're going, oh, well, you're not you. It's a straw man, guys. It is a scapegoat. It is one of the most dishonest things in this conversation, because they know what they're doing. We can all prove that because they're getting caught by everybody. But this is the kind of excuse they give to gaslight some group of the population, largely Republicans, into pretending that they can just ignore your rights when they make up a narrative. And how you don't see that's going to swing back around on you.
Mr. Secretary, a Turkish student in Boston was detained and handcuffed on the...
By the way, most of them, including her, I think she was the doctoral student. They're either just going for their doctorate or are PhD students or are actual doctors. And so that larger point I made the other day, what is the real point here? Have we just lost sight of the idea that what the argument was is going after criminals and people as a drain on the system? It weirdly has reverted into going after the most educated and influential people speaking about Israel. Gee, who didn't see that coming?
Street by plainclothes agents. A year ago, she wrote an opinion piece about the Gaza war. Could you help us understand what the specific action she took led to her visa being revoked?
Okay, so let's remember, the question was, what was the specific action that she took?
Yeah.
What was your State Department's role in that process?
We revoked her visa. It's an F1 visa, I believe. We revoked it, and here's why. And I'll say it again. I said it everywhere. Let me be abundantly clear, okay? If you go apply for a visa right now, anywhere in the world, let me just send this message out. If you apply for a visa to enter the United States and be a student, and you tell us that the reason why you're coming to the United States is not just because you want to write op-eds, but because you want to participate in movements that are involved in doing things like vandalizing universities.
Oh, okay. So now it's just being involved in movements that go on to do. Oh, so you knew that. Right. So these groups have stated charters that say we're going to go vandalize buildings. No. And frankly, most of the things they're pointing to are not what they claim they are. Right. And of course, not the Hamas anti-Semites they claim. Most of them are Jewish organizations, but you can prove that these are peaceful sit-ins that are not what they claim. It's embarrassing that they just keep going forward. But even then, what are you actually saying? That when you come into this country to apply for a visa, you're supposed to write down that you want to work with groups that vandalize, or that you're supposed to know that, or it's all so stupid and abstract. Even then, it doesn't make any difference. Just because you didn't write down that you do something later does not change the fact that you're here and have rights. That's what he's trying to insinuate, is that you somehow violated that original contract. And that's why there's no process necessary. It's a lazy argument that they think might hold up in court because of some probably politically invested judge. That's how they all work. But the idea is that even if they still have the right for that evidence to be presented. And he just brushes over that, talks for the entire time, and doesn't even answer the original question.
He's harassing students, taking over buildings, creating a ruckus.
Didn't do any of that.
Give you a visa.
Got to be clear. She didn't do any of that. None of it. She wrote an op-ed, and she's not even part of this. She didn't go into these protests. She wasn't even part of this. She was somebody who wrote an op-ed who was going to a different school, and they just arrested her because she's an intellectual speaking out about Israel. And all he can do is conflate it with an entire mob of people, many of which didn't do any of what he said. That's not how this supposed justice system is supposed to work, and we all know that.
If you lie to us and get a visa and then enter the United States and with that visa participate in that sort of activity, we're going to take away your visa.
Okay, how about she didn't lie? How about she thought and later did those things, even though she didn't do them, understand? Just for the sake of argument, let's just hypothetically say she changed her mind once she got here. What happens then, Rubio? Are you going to be able to prove that she knowingly lied about committing vandalism 10 years later? I mean, how dumb is that? Because you realize what he's trying to squirm his way out of is that they still have constitutional rights. So you would have to prove that even then, if you pretend she violated, lied on her visa, that doesn't change the fact that you still have those rights. So it's a lazy argument anyway. It's playing on the ignorance of dumb people that hate people because they've been primed to. As she says, he's not saying non-citizens have no right to do this, but he's saying you also don't have the right to read their work. Now, Glenn says, it's so telling that a PhD student writes an op-ed calmly criticizing Israel, and so many people say, how dare she come here and attack our country? Get her out. Well, he has a reminder for you guys. Israel is not part of the United States. It's not a U.S. state. It's not our colonial master. Israel's a foreign country. Funny how that works out. People can't recognize that. Here's the actual, you can read it for yourself. It's very well done. It's very clear. None of it it's not Hamas. It is about genocide, law, reality. You can read it for yourself. They're simply saying that this school has to acknowledge this, and you could disagree with them, but to pretend like this is in any way not completely within anybody's constitutional rights, or if even to call this against Israel is not even accurate. I mean, it's just so wild. They're simply calling people, they're saying they have to divest from Israel because of what's going on. And they referenced South Africa and the same thing they did during apartheid South Africa that was praised by everybody. Now it's different. I wonder why. You can read it, guys. It's insane. They're trying to make this into be terrorism support. If this is terrorism support, then, I mean, like, think about the kind of things that the U.S. governments are doing while they're committing a genocide. Or how about Saudi Arabia and all the things they're doing in Yemen? Like the idea that we can see them gushingly supporting these things, and that's not supporting terrorism, but they simply say, we disagree with the legal reality of what they're doing. And they're like, oh, terrorism. These are the terrorists who are trying to gaslight you into going against their enemies. No, he just gives you that to read. I think I'm going to leave it there. Go into some more. This goes into the anomalies, calling out the woke right on this, saying that they're getting lost by basically right now, Trump and Israel are forcing the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism on Columbia School. And they're forcing it in. which, if you don't know, is about conflating, like saying that you can't call out Zionism, you can't criticize Israel's actions politically, and it's all racist. You can't even use what they say, a double standard against Israel, whatever that even means. It is completely anything against Israel will be called anti-Semitism, which is the entire point. And we'll go over it. Now, I'm going to go into this more about the many different people who are being taken right now, deported. Almost every single one of them has some high-level education, people that are, or already doctors who are just being accused of being terrorists because they call out something everybody knows is happening. To make sure that one's something I want to include on the way out here. In the UK, it's happening as well. Don't forget, Trump floating the idea of deporting Americans is very important. And as Glenn says, it took many conservatives about 8 weeks to go from no more Middle East wars, F the military-industrial complex, keep that money here at home, to hell yeah, Trump restarted Biden's bombing of Yemen, and we're collapsing residential buildings throughout the Middle East. Hooray. He's right. It's embarrassing. Now, Donald Trump, you might have seen on the 27th, has started bombing Somalia again, even though nothing really stopped. I said the peace president. And if you think it's about the 100% defeated ISIS, as they claim, you're not paying attention. But then don't worry, Tulsi Gabbard comes out and says, President Trump is the president of peace. He's ending bloodshed across the world. If you ever wondered where she really was in all this, I think you know by now. And I just simply gave him that face, and or publicly doing the exact opposite. Interesting times. And then Kevork Almacian says, if the U.S. can detect somebody on a hit list in Yemen, like they claim they did, and then follow him going into his girlfriend's home, which is what they claim, why doesn't the U.S. Army bomb him on his way to that residential building packed with people? Did they drop a bomb on the entire residential building? Am I asking the wrong question? You know what he's saying, guys. There's more to the whole Yemen signal debacle. At the end of the day, it shows you just what Israel's doing in Gaza. Okay, if they're claiming, which they claim they can do and have proven they can track somebody to the person, then explain why they keep bombing entire buildings full of people. It's obvious, because they want to. And Sal, I'm going to go into this more as well, but Sal says, is literally anybody buying the whole we need to conquer Greenland for our own safety shtick? They're literally doing that now. The whole you're being trolled about Greenland, that's now literally becoming real. They are actually discussing this as if they are going to take Greenland by force. And there's a Guardian article claiming that Putin endorses it. As far as I can tell, it's completely not even true. We'll go over this more. You have Vance trying to convince Greenland that they're somehow not doing their duty for the United States. It's just insane what's going on. And there's a video. Actually, let me do this. Yeah, I don't want to end with that. Trump put out a video promoting taking Greenland. It's better to go into this tomorrow, or then whatever. If most likely tomorrow, another show. But think about how wild this is. As mentioned, says this propaganda video made to prepare minds for the takeover of Greenland mentions the threat of China expansion. The U.S. has nearly 1,000 bases abroad. China may have 1 or 2. In the past 2 months, the U.S. has spoken about invading Canada, Greenland, Mexico, Panama, and even Gaza. My God. And let's not forget USAID to build Gaza. We'll see how that works out. This may be the most insane era of the United States yet, says Daniel McAdams. And this is CNN has learned exclusively that Ecuador isn't just calling for U.S. help, it's preparing to host American troops. You hear that? Ryan Grimm says Trump is literally considering stationing troops in Ecuador. Why? Because a center-left party is competing in an upcoming election. South America first. Well, Israel first, South America second, then America. That's insane. So the idea being essentially that we need to control the outcome of elections. Now, let's not forget Ecuador, right? We're talking about, there is an ongoing effort to overtake a lot of this location. Let's not Honduras. Let's not forget that's Prospera. Freedom City's popping off. We will get to that soon. I am still continuing to build that in the background. There's going to come a time when that's going to be needed to talk about. The point is clear, guys. This cannot be anything other than, look, if you want to pretend this is America first, then at least make sure you're being clear that it's American government first at the expense of Americans, because this is not what people wanted. This not what the right wanted, at the very least, not what anybody wants. Stand up. Now is the time. Stay the course. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never seen a more important time to actually start, mobilizing effort against this direction, whatever that means to you. And I'm never calling for violence, but I think the more people we can get to be aware that we're all seeing this, the better, the more effective this will be in stopping it. I mean, we can't just stand here and do nothing, guys. The more you stand up, the more you call this out, the more people see what's happening, the more they recognize that it's okay to say something. Corbett's talked about the Milgram experiment, the TSA overlap, right? If you just simply show people like we're trying to do here, that you don't have to just sit by and let it happen. I mean, some people haven't even registered that they could do that. That's not a joke. People see you resisting, like the example being at the TSA, for example, and they go, oh, I don't have to just stand in this line and do what you say. I didn't even know that was an option. Show people that there's another option. Just push back, stand up, say something, call this out. Because guys, we cannot let this just dwindle into the background. Whatever you thought this country ever was, if it ever really was what we thought it was, we cannot lose what we're slowly losing right now. Because, I mean, it seems to be this last dying grasp, even the illusion of it, stopping whatever's coming. Stand up and fight. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting TLAV. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.